All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our first coverage of the 2021 election cycle. We're back. As you know, our last coverage occurred in January when we covered the Senate runoffs in Georgia, but we're very excited today to be back for the 2021 cycle, covering the first round of voting in two House special elections in Louisiana. We're looking at the 2nd District and the 5th District. And I'll go into detail on those districts later since we have a higher audience than we did for my preview stream earlier today. I think it might just be me and Eric. We might also have some more people coming on. But
yeah.
Eric, do you want to introduce anything else tonight before I get going?
We're excited to get back into doing election coverage as more elections come in. Obviously, we'll be covering elections later in the year for Virginia and New Jersey. We have ongoing ratings for those right now. We also have an article from Harrison, which I'm going to try to pull up here, which is covering these special elections. We're basically looking tonight. Obviously, the two primaries we have are primaries. Yeah, there are primaries or special elections. We have Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District and Louisiana's 5th Congressional District. The 2nd is a safe Democratic seat in the New Orleans and Baton Rouge. That's where it stretches through, majority black seat. And then the other one, Louisiana's 5th Congressional District, basically stretches along the Mississippi River, some of the areas around Baton Rouge, and some of the areas in central Louisiana. Neither of these seats are competitive at the federal level or any other level for that matter. But what this does mean is that the primaries are very interesting in both of them. And we actually expect things to be a little bit different here.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and pull up our maps that we have listed here of the congressional districts in Louisiana. But they're two very different congressional districts in the state that's very has some very interesting and very, very racially polarized voting patterns. It's probably the most racially polarized state in the country, with the exception of Mississippi, if I recall right, which is just absurd in its level of racial polarization.
It's very true. And if we look at both of these districts, I know Eric's pulling up the map, so I'll just take a little bit of time to talk about the state of the races in both of these districts. You'll hear more updates from us tonight as we go on. But yes, I just want to address Ryan Cook's comment. Polls do close at 8 p.m. We opted to start the stream 30 minutes before poll closing on the East Coast so we could introduce the districts. So,
and we tend to do this with our live streams, just for future reference. 100%. If you're watching, we tend to do this.
Before I go over the races and the candidates and all that, I'll just let Eric explain the geographic nature of the 5th and 2nd district here.
Yeah, so obviously, Louisiana, I think it's worth noting, Louisiana's congressional districts used to look very different from the ones they look like right now. Before Hurricane Katrina, Louisiana had 7 congressional districts. Unfortunately, that hurricane resulted in a massive loss of life, and it also resulted in a massive group of people leaving New Orleans. This, in combination with existing factors, meant that not only did New Orleans lose a congressional district, it actually had to radically rechange their map in order to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And I'm going to pull up the original map here, just so you can get an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about these. What we're talking about here. So this is the original map from last cycle. Very different. Obviously, the 2nd district there is this red district, which is basically all of New Orleans plus a few other areas. Very Democratic seat. It did elect a Republican in 2008 in a fluke, but very Democratic.
Does not have to include Baton Rouge as well.
Yes, Baton Rouge was in the 6th, which is more of a battleground seat. Back then, Baton Rouge was a competitive district that had been won by people like George Bush. Now it's a very safely Democratic area. And then the 5th had this, but basically very similar to the current one.
Parish was actually once a bellwether.
Yeah,
I was just going to add that East Baton Rouge Parish until 2008 was a bellwether.
Yeah, but now obviously it's different. And then the 5th here, very similar to the current one actually. The current 5th is not that different from the one right now. But obviously, if you look at that right there, that's a very interesting thing. Now we'll go look at the current districts again, just so you get to kind of give the contextualization. The population loss resulted in a new majority black district stretching from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. And we can kind of zoom in here. It's a very ugly looking district. Keep in mind that there's a gigantic lake here. This area all around here is New Orleans, kind of the county lines kind of aren't all the way up here. They're really, the land barrier is down towards here. So these areas of one are discontiguous from the rest of the district and are connected only by a bridge. So that's kind of unusual, but it's traditional because these areas right here tend to be very conservative, very Republican-leaning areas, although it's changed lately. So the 2nd stretch is all the way from New Orleans.
Being so big.
Yeah. And there's a gigantic bridge, obviously, that crosses it. One of the longest bridges in the United States, maybe the world, if I'm recalling right. It's a gigantic bridge. And it's these areas up here are suburban New Orleans, generally in character. And then the second stretches along these majority black areas of New Orleans. There's obviously a few Republican or wider areas of New Orleans here. Stretches all the way through these counties, some of which are majority black, some of which aren't. Then into the parts of Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge is a consolidated city-county in some ways. The city of Baton Rouge is the county of Baton Rouge, aside from a few other cities. And also, unless there's a different city organized in your area, the mayor that you elect is the mayor of the county in the city of East Baton Rouge. There's been some debate lately over the southern area, wants to become the place known as St. George. That may or may not happen. But this basically stretches in all that area, and it's majority black, and it's a very, very ugly district. But keep in mind, there is a Voting Rights Act component here. I wouldn't quite say this is a very fair district. You could probably draw a district just in New Orleans area that would elect a black Democrat, but would not be majority black. The legislature opted instead to draw a majority African-American district like this. So that's the second, very Democratic. It would never elect a Republican, certainly not these days. The fifth is obviously very similar to the previous version. It's got small cities like Ruston, Monroe. It's got these majority African-American cities along the Mississippi River, these counties right here, and then draws in some other areas around here that the county splits here are unusual, but they do basically divide some of these areas. So the fifth is basically this Baton Rouge area, New Orleans area portion that's part of also adjacent to Mississippi, and then this historically fifth area portion right here, which is the center of the state, traditionally more Democratic than it is now, and it's a very, very Republican district as it is right now. There's no chance this district would elect a Republican or Democrat, just like this district, the second, would never elect a Republican at this point. So neither of these districts are competitive. So why are we paying attention to these? I'll throw that to Harrison to explain why these races are important and why we're looking at them, because as far as I know, Louisiana is the only state right now with 2 vacant congressional seats, which is very important in a small delegation like Louisiana has only 6 members. So basically, they only have 4 representatives in Congress right now.
Yeah, so it's very true. So thank you for the geographic introduction. I'm just going to go over both races briefly. I'll basically do a condensed version around 15 minutes of what I did earlier today in my 30-minute special where I introduced both races. So I'll start with the 2nd district. The 2nd district, as Eric mentioned, is the only Democratic seat and the only VRA seat in the state of Louisiana. There's debate about whether or not Louisiana will pick up another VRA seat and therefore another Democratic seat in redistricting, but that remains to be seen, so we're just sticking with this. As Eric also mentioned earlier, the effects of Hurricane Katrina and the population loss in the New Orleans area, as well as the desire to ensure that there was a majority black seat in Louisiana, forced that awkward design that you see, which basically stretches from Orleans Parish all the way out to East Baton Rouge Parish and picks up all the black precincts in between in an effort to craft a majority black district. So this is a very Democratic district. We're talking around 75-80% of the total vote going to Democrats if you look at the last presidential election. And yeah, as Eric has shown us right here, that is the 2nd district. And it's true, it is not a very pretty district. It is very Democratic. Only about a quarter of the district's general voting population could be considered Republican. So a very, very Democratic district, the complete opposite of the 5th. But Eric, if you could zoom in a little bit to the left part of that on the county level, I don't know if that's possible.
Oh, the county level? Yes, it is. It is. It might look a little bit ugly, but you can kind of see.
I mean, like on the left side.
Oh, this right here?
Yeah, or the parishes there, so everyone can see the parish names. So you've got Orleans Parish, number 1, which makes up the majority of the vote. We're talking about 45% of the total vote being cast in Orleans Parish, which is the city of New Orleans, the black precincts in New Orleans. And if we break New Orleans down on the ward level, and I went through this with John Couvillon before this, and it was very, very helpful. We did it 2 days ago. And if you want, it's still in the works, but I think we're going to have an election after show with him tomorrow. If you don't follow him, follow John Couvillon on Twitter. He's a Louisiana politics insider and expert. Highly recommend it. Great guy. But if you look at Orleans Parish there, just like any city, you have the traditional black wards and you have the more liberal white wards at this point. So I'd like to bring up a couple things. Before we talk about candidates, before we talk about anything, we have to talk about the dynamics in Orleans Parish. And these are essentially accurate as I heard them 2 days ago from him. And they fueled into my new analysis because my original article didn't have all this extra analysis and information that you get from someone who's been following Louisiana politics for decades. So if you look at New Orleans, as I was about to say earlier, just like any city, you have different sections of the city that are divided based on racial lines, and that fuels their political alignment as well. And while most of these wards are still partial to the Democrats, we're looking at a different kind of Democrat that each ward will prefer in a primary. So I'd like to liken this first. I'll say this is very much alike to the Missouri primary we saw last year between Lacey Clay, the incumbent who had been there for a very long time, and Cori Bush, the more progressive candidate. And if you look at that election on a ward level in St. Louis, the more heavily black wards, the traditional Lacey Clay supporting wards in southern St. Louis, were more partial to Clay, while the wards that had higher white populations up in the northern part of St. Louis were more partial to Cori Bush. Now, this is something that he confirmed could be at play here tonight. And while we only have parish level results for Orleans and we don't have the ward level results, at least not now, we don't have access to them, I bet you in the coming days, if we look at this, we'll be able to see the little dynamic between Karen Carter Peterson and Troy Carter, because basically what he said is the more traditional black wards in downtown New Orleans are going to back Troy Carter. Troy Carter is about as popular there as he is in Jefferson Parish, where Karen Carter Peterson is just not as popular. And the uptown wards in New Orleans and Orleans Parish, those are the wards where the white population is higher, and those are the wards where you're likely going to see Karen Carter Peterson doing better in Orleans Parish. But just to conclude about that, the reason why I mentioned Carter's strength in the more traditionally black wards of New Orleans and that being important for securing Orleans Parish is largely because the electorate is 65 and older. That's the average. If we look at the early votes, those are two things that John Couvillon pointed out pretty clearly. The first being that the early voting average electorate age was 65, which is very, very old. And if you look at the voting patterns of African Americans in that age group, normally they prefer a more traditional Democratic candidate, center-left mainstream, kind of in the vein of Joe Biden. That's Troy Carter. Troy Carter is the minority leader of the state Senate. He has the support of Cedric Richmond, the outgoing congressman, many other prominent black congresspeople as well, particularly Jim Clyburn, who's the majority whip. So if we look at both of those, you've got a candidate who not only is endorsed by the federal establishment, not only meets the center-left attitude that many of these traditionally minded black voters would have when they're going to the polls, but also has the endorsement of many local figures. You know, if you get the endorsement of a parish president or someone who works locally in the government, that means a lot more than getting the endorsement of some progressive group out of the state. And that's just a fact for many of these voters. And that's why, hopefully, if our analysis is correct and what John Couvillon said turns out to be correct, we're going to see a similar dichotomy, and you'll likely see Troy Carter doing well in Orleans Parish, doing well in Jefferson Parish as well. And that moves us on to the West as we move west. So the third candidate that's gotten a lot of speculation in this primary is not a state senator and is not in the top two. And normally the polling has shown State Senator Troy Carter in first, Karen Carter Peterson, who's the more progressive candidate, in second place, generally around anywhere from 5 to 10 points behind. There was one internal poll that showed her only 1 point behind, but the accuracy of that is a bit doubtful. But we go to East Baton Rouge Parish, French words. And that parish right here makes up about 15% of the vote. So this is why some people have been a bit hesitant to believe all of this rhetoric that Gary Chambers could theoretically get to a runoff. If anything, Gary Chambers will most likely prevent Karen Carter Peterson from getting the percentage of the vote that she would want, because they're both progressives, they're both running, and someone like Gary Chambers has a strong base out west. I would be very surprised if Gary Chambers did not win East Baton Rouge Parish, because that's where he's from. The rest of the major Democratic candidates are from the Orleans Parish area. And East Baton Rouge Parish casts about 15% of the total vote. So not like the 45% that you have out of Orleans Parish, but still enough to get 7 to 10% of the vote, still enough to split the Peterson vote. And this plays into another potential outcome. And this is something that I talked with John Couvillon about. And he brought up this potential outcome to me. There is a Republican, Claston Bernard, and I'm going to be honest, I largely wrote him off because we looked at the district and we're like, well, obviously the district's not going to elect a Republican, and it won't elect a Republican. If Claston Bernard somehow makes a runoff against any Democrat, he will lose handily because it's just a Democratic district. And if it's low turnout, you're probably going to see that most of the electorate is occupied by the black vote, and that white voters will be essentially not enthused to vote. But back to the point, you've got a lot of Democratic candidates here, almost a dozen. Most of them, just like we see in the fifth with the Republican field, the Democratic field in the second is the same way. You've got a lot of candidates who, you know, they're not really well known, don't have a lot of momentum, but they'll still get around 0.5% to 1% of the vote. That adds up. It adds up pretty quickly. And what you end up getting is around 10% of the vote going to essentially candidates that people don't know. And that pulls away votes from the Democrats. So we estimate Troy Carter will get around 35 to 37% of the vote. That's the ballpark range. 10% would probably go to the remaining combined dozen of Democratic candidates that aren't well known. And I'm just being honest, most of them aren't, like a lot of the Republicans running against Julia Letlow in the 5th district. But then you've got Claston Bernard, who's a semi-credible Republican running in, frankly, a solid blue district. And the only hope for Claston Bernard is this. 2 things need to happen for Claston Bernard to somehow get to a runoff. And I'd like to preface this by saying that Claston Bernard getting to a runoff is highly unlikely. There are 3 possibilities tonight for Louisiana's 2nd district in our view. The first one is the most likely one, and I'd give this about a 95% chance of happening or higher, and that is that Troy Carter and Karen Carter Peterson advance to a runoff election in April. That's the most likely thing. Outcome number 2 is the potential Claston Bernard runoff, getting into a runoff. And let me explain the reasoning we have behind this. If you get someone like Troy Carter doing exceptionally well, and I mean getting around 40% of the vote, and you have the essentially unknown Democratic candidates locking up 10% of the vote, that's already half of the total electorate essentially locked up for those Democrats. And if you have Gary Chambers performing better than expected and Karen Carter Peterson performing worse than expected, that's enough to potentially lock a second Democrat out of a runoff. Because if they both get brought down to 15% each or something low like that, and again, this is hard. You'd have to have someone like Gary Chambers doing better than the 10% ballpark we estimate, and you'd have to have someone like Peterson doing worse than the 25% ballpark we estimate. But if that happens, to get straight to the point, Claston Bernard could get 15% of the vote and get into the runoff. And you're probably going to see him doing better in parishes that wouldn't typically vote for a Republican just because the Democratic vote is split. So could you zoom in, Eric, on St. Charles there? St. Charles Parish is the most.
And one thing I want to mention here is important is that the last general election, the 2 Republican candidates combined for 19% of the vote. So that's kind of an important fact. That's basically the top line of Republicans there.
Yeah, I know. And that's, as I was saying, St. Charles is the only parish in the district that voted against Cedric Richmond in the last election. So that's the most Republican parish. If you go to the west a bit, I don't know if you can do that or shift over. Yeah, you've also got the potential for Assumption or St. James to vote for the Republican candidate because remember, those were the parishes where the Republican opposition to Richmond was the strongest in the last election, still heavily Democratic. But again, you have to remember that we've got one major Republican here, and I think one minor Republican versus a heavily split Democratic field. So again, unlikely, but possible. If you have the 2 progressive Democrats split the vote enough and Troy Carter laps up enough of the Democratic support, then it's very possible that someone like Claston Bernard with 15 to 17% of the vote or more could get into this runoff. And the final outcome, which I wanted to mention, is essentially going to be the Gary Chambers runoff. That's unlikely, in my opinion, that Gary Chambers gets into a runoff. If he somehow does, I don't even know what to say. I don't have analysis for it. It just doesn't seem likely to happen. And then I guess the final possibility is somehow Troy Carter wins on the first round, which is unlikely. So, Eric, if you want to pull up the 5th district map, we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to show first actually is just to kind of plug our redistricting tool here before we go into it, just to show a comparison of what the current second looks like versus what it could look like under a more fair map. Here we have a second that's entirely based around Orleans Parish. It's got some of those affluent white areas around it, and this would be about 44% black, 46% white in terms of VAP. And this would almost certainly elect Troy Carter. His strength in the Orleans Parish would be very, very strong here. And then you'd have a second one that takes in Baton Rouge. But notice it's not nearly as Democratic because this isn't as Democratic an area as New Orleans. This is a very, very Democratic area. So, I mean, it's theoretically possible a Republican winning statewide with 70% of the vote could win the 6th. There's no scenario a Republican wins anything that's based in New Orleans. But to get into the 5th, obviously, you saw the 5th there, which takes in kind of these rather unpopulated areas right here. But this 5th is almost certainly, based around these portions right here, these counties that are outside of that River Delta area.
So when you look at the 5th district, there are 3 or 4 parishes that are essentially the mainstay of the votes. And those parishes, if I had to say, John Couvillon called them powerhouse parishes, but Tangipahoa Parish, St. Landry Parish, Rapides Parish, and Ochita Parish. And I probably butchered some of the pronunciations, but those are the four we're watching tonight because that's where you have the greatest quantity of votes, the greatest population. So those are the four parishes I'd say to watch, and I'll type them in the chat later. But we have 9 minutes left before we get first results. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but 52% of the total votes in both of these elections were mail-in votes, meaning they're already going to be in the election offices today because, as John Couvillon pointed out, postmarks don't matter in Louisiana. You have to have it in by the election day into the elections office. So if I want to talk about the 5th real quick, obviously the 5th is prefaced by the very, very tragic passing of Luke Letlow, who was congressman-elect from the district and won the December runoff from COVID. It's very, very sad. Since then, his widow, Julia Letlow, has sought election to the seat and has managed to basically secure the field. So there are no other really credible Republicans running, no one like Lance Harris, who was a state legislator. And she's lapped up the support of Ralph Abraham because Luke Letlow was Ralph Abraham's chief of staff, and also of President Trump, many other Republicans. All those endorsements certainly play well in a district like this, which essentially almost went to Trump by about 30 points or so. But it's a very, very...
Even Lance Harris is endorsing her. Even Lance Harris has supported her. He ran against Luke Letlow.
Yeah, and this is a very on-the-doorstep type district, campaigning around, like John Couvillon told me on Thursday. It's essentially a district where the people want to know their congressman, and they know the Letlow name because Luke Letlow handled a lot of the issues for someone like Ralph Abraham when he was his chief of staff, and Ralph Abraham was the congressman here. On top of that, the sympathy vote is a powerful thing, and it's very tragic what happened, but it is indeed a powerful factor, and it's something we're going to have to watch later this year in the 6th district, where Susan Wright is running in a much more crowded field to succeed her late husband, Ron Wright. So looking at this district, unlike the 6th, you don't really have any credible candidates here. As I mentioned earlier, really the only other credible Republican running in this district, and I wouldn't necessarily say credible, is Chad Connerly. And he's been running a very, very conservative, more populist wing type campaign, anti-establishment. Couvillon described it as a Facebook type campaign. So that's the only other Republican I'd say you would watch. A quick note on the Democrat here. Candy Christoph is the Democrat. She ran last November, but the Democratic vote was split 4 ways. And obviously, when the Democratic vote is split 4 ways, we're talking about really the only 35% of the vote here that goes to Democrats being split up, and that stopped her from getting into a runoff. And get this, even with 3 other Democrats in addition to her in the race, siphoning off votes, she still came very close to getting to the runoff. Fell only essentially, I think, 0.1% away from passing Lance Harris and getting into the runoff.
She was only 400 votes, less than 400 votes off. Very impressive performance to get into the runoff.
The odds of having an R-on-R runoff here it's impossible because this time around she's the only Democratic candidate, which means she's going to get all of the Republican votes. Now, personally, I would expect Julia Letlow to get over 50% of the vote tonight. It's possible that she doesn't. It depends on how strong the other Republicans are. There are a lot of token Republicans running, but a lot like the Democrats, some of the lesser known names in the 2nd, most of these candidates are probably only going to get about 1% of the vote each, if you know how it goes with relatively unknown candidates. Maybe Chad Connerly gets around 15% of the vote. Maybe no, maybe more. We're going to have to see. It depends on how the GOP vote's divided. But again, the odds of an R-on-R runoff, basically impossible at this point. So
yeah, keep in mind, there's 12 candidates in total running in this race, and only one of them is a Democrat.
Yeah, so there are less options when we look at it here. There are fewer options. So we either have option 1, which we consider most likely, and that essentially is going to be, the first round victory for Julia Letlow, getting over 50% of the vote, and that would just instantly end this election here. The second most likely option is a Letlow-Christoph runoff where Letlow would win. She would win pretty easily given how Republican the district is. So those are your 2 options here. Pretty straightforward. The odds of another Republican and Christoph getting in, incredibly low. And the odds of a Republican runoff, again, very, very low. So yeah, our final guess is Letlow will probably win without the need for a runoff. And then the 2nd district, we expect Carter to finish in first place and advance to a Carter-Peterson runoff, which will occur in April. So those are our guesses. Polls are about to close. And yeah, we hope you liked our introduction. Definitely was less tired now than I was earlier today. I didn't make any mistakes, so I'm happy about that. So
yeah.
Thank you to all 45 of our viewers. We appreciate you watching. Now I'm going to shut up and we can just watch the returns.
Yep. And yeah, we're excited to get started back on this. Obviously, election season is fun, and the circumstances behind one of these elections is tragic. But we are following this very closely. And Julia Letlow, we do think she's the favorite to win. I even looked into the endorsements. It's none of the other Republicans appear to have garnered even a single endorsement.
No, yeah, definitely
from any prominent figures. When you have Nikki Haley, Donald Trump, Elise Stefanik, Kevin McCarthy all backing you for the same House race, in addition to that sympathy vote, we do think it is very, very likely that she could get 50% of the vote.
And it's not like the 6th district in Texas. There really are literally no credible other Republicans running in this race. No other credible ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for that race, just since we have a little bit of time here, Susan Wright, who is the widow of the late Ron Wright, who died of cancer, he had already been sworn in for his additional term, but he died of that, whereas Luke Letlow died before he could be sworn in. Yeah. She is sweeping the floor with endorsements, but there are other Republicans in that race who are credible, who could take a significant portion of the vote. And it is worth noting, of course, that some of you may not be familiar with Louisiana's rules. Louisiana has what's called a blanket primary, which means all the candidates run in a single large primary. They're all listed, and you can vote for one of them. And if no candidate gets 50% of the vote in this jungle blanket primary, it goes to a runoff. Mm-hmm. Normally these happen on election day. So if nobody gets 50% of the vote on election day, you have a runoff later to determine it. And this includes Senate races, for example, Senate races, House races, all sorts of things. Here, obviously, the more candidates you have running, the more likely it is it goes to a runoff. Only a few other states use this method. California uses a similar method. Washington uses a similar method. But Louisiana is the only state in the South that uses this method. Well, it's resulted in some unusual – it doesn't result in the unusual outcomes you can get from a Washington or from a California.
We have to note as well that some of the states that don't use this format in the general election do use it for special elections. Mississippi and Texas both use jungle primaries for special elections. So that's what's going to be weird with Texas 6. You've got literally like 25 candidates in Texas 6 across all the fields, and it's going to be a jungle primary.
And it's worth noting, of course, that California has a weird jungle primary where they have the jungle primary as a regular primary, and then they have an actual general election between two candidates. So you can get over 50% in their jungle primary. It doesn't matter. They'll run the election again on election day. Whereas here, their election is on election day. It's a very unusual system. And unlike in California, where you often have elections sometimes where there's 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats in a swing district, there are no swing districts in Louisiana. So there's really no risk that a Republican seat votes for a Democrat or vice versa. That scenario would be very unlikely and virtually impossible given the polarization of Louisiana's districts.
We're looking at both of these races because they can teach us about primary election dynamics, like I said this morning, and that's fascinating, but definitely not general election seats.
Yeah, these aren't competitive seats in the slightest, whereas Texas 6th congressional is a competitive district, at least at the presidential level.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In fact, Texas 6, I think, is the only competitive House district that is scheduled to have a special election right now.
Oh, and one other thing for maybe the 5 people here who don't know, Louisiana does not have counties, they have parishes. They're one of 2 states that have county-level subdivisions, but they're called parishes, not counties. The only other state that does this is Alaska, where they have boroughs. But when we say parish, what we're talking about is the equivalent of a county.
But it's kind of funny. It's a dynamic because Alaska is the only state that uses boroughs, and boroughs is a German. This comes from a German word. It's Germanic.
And there's parts of Alaska that aren't even part of a borough. They're part of the unorganized borough. So they only even have a small number of ones that are actually organized because a lot of Alaska, nobody lives in it. It's federal land. Nobody lives in it except for maybe a few natives. And they just lump it into an unorganized borough. But yeah, it's 9 o'clock now, or at least it's showing for me 9 o'clock Eastern in terms of their time. It would be 8 o'clock. So I believe we should be getting results in fairly shortly, correct?
Yep. Polls are closing now. And as I said, half the votes, over half, were mailed-in ballots that were supposed to be in the elections office today because Louisiana has different laws with mail-ins in a state like Pennsylvania. So it doesn't matter what the postmark is.
Or North Carolina. In North Carolina, we were waiting for, I believe, 10 days past the election to get – now, granted, most of these – there were virtually no ballots that came in after that point. No elections had their results changed. as a result of this. But does result in some ballots not being counted because they didn't get in on time. That's a factor you have to consider when you're mailing in your ballots.
I guess I'll just fill the time in the meantime. Someone asked, how close could Republicans come in New Mexico's first? I will say, out of all the districts, besides Texas 6, so this does not include Texas 6, but out of the rest of the districts with special elections, New Mexico's first is going to be the most competitive one. I won't say it's competitive, but on paper, it's the closest. Last House election, Republicans got about 40% of the vote there. So pretty much the average is 40% for the GOP. So depending on the turnout, depending on the electorate, you could get a little bit under, a little bit over that. We'll have to see. It could be competitive. It could be kind of foreshadowing 2022. We'll have to see. But you have to remember as well, and this is why I didn't talk about New Mexico in my last article about special elections, they're choosing their candidates by essentially a convention, not a primary. So we have no idea who's going to be selected for both parties in terms of nominee. We have no idea at the moment. So we'll get more over the summer.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind here is that I don't want to discount the possibility this race could be competitive in some way, because we've seen special elections throughout previous cycles that have shown themselves to be competitive, even in uncompetitive districts. South Carolina's 5th congressional district, Archie Parnell, the Democrat, nearly beat, I believe, Ralph Norman for that seat, which is a very Republican trending area, not even a very Republican leaning. Montana's at-large congressional district, Rob Quist, came fairly close to beating a progressive candidate with the endorsement of Our Revolution. Bernie Sanders, Medicare for All supporter, came close to beating Greg Gianforte for that race. We saw this in other ones. Pennsylvania, Conor Lamb won that congressional district that Donald Trump won by a very large margin. There's a little chance Mark Ronchetti runs for this seat. It's actually the most Democratic part of New Mexico because there's a lot of Native American voters in this district. It's not really that competitive at that level, but there's a possibility Republicans could get 45, 46% in a good day. And that would be concerning for Democrats because that could portend a blue or red wave in the upcoming federal election. And that's something they would not want.
So overall, we're just looking at county level results. But
parish.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was the one who was going to correct you earlier because you said county, and then someone's like, it's parish, and I was saying parish, now I'm saying county. We should just call everything boroughs. So you know what? I apologize. But
it's all boroughs now.
Like, yes, I know they're parishes, but just force of habit just is going to keep making me call them counties. But my point is, we do have the first results, and I was also going to say, before we talk about those, that RRH and Cynic, they're doing, I think, precinct level results on their website, which is fascinating. So I will be taking a look at that as well. So that's going to be fun. We'll be able to see the literal sub-parish regional divide.
Yeah, and these are pretty big results early on, too, in the Republican in 5th congressional district. What we're looking at here is these early results that have come in. 6 of 24 parishes reporting so far with some of these early results. Julia Letlow, as predicted, 56% of the vote right now. Sandy Christophe is at 37% of the vote, so obviously not a competitive district as we expected, with a Chad Connerly at around 4% of the vote. And he's the only other even semi-credible or semi-notable Republican here. These other Republicans have gotten virtually no support at all, which is to be expected in this district.
Yeah, as we said, Chad Connerly is the only other semi-credible Republican candidate. And you can see he's at about 4% of the vote right now. But I think what you see right now in the 5th district with Julia Letlow at 56%, that's probably about right. I mean, we estimate if you look at the party composition, this is pretty much lines up with what we expected. I mean, around 55% for Letlow, 35%, which is all the Democrats essentially, for Christophe, and then the rest of the Republicans breaking. So this is possible that this is how it holds out. So, someone requested sharing screen. I'm not sure if we can do that.
What do you mean? Sharing the screen for the Cine 9C results?
Yes.
What I would suggest is I'm going to post the link. I'm sure they would be fine with us doing it, but I would rather direct the clicks to their site rather than us showing you the results because this is good work and it deserves to be supported. Yeah. We can maybe show some of it later, but I would like to at least post the link here, and I'll highlight it here just so you can see it. It's really worth following. Cine 9C is really, really good with this data stuff. On his tutorials for QGIS, if you're ever interested in learning QGIS, are genuinely terrific. They really help me out in getting to know that sort of stuff. So really good
Yeah.
stuff. Take a look at it. Oh wow, Chad Connerly's website is broken. Good grief.
Well, Chad Connerly is not. I mean, when I say he's
Well,
a
his
credible
issues,
candidate,
yeah,
when I say he's credible, I just mean that he's going to be the top Republican besides Letlow. I
yeah.
didn't mean that he
Like there are
actually.
images that are broken. Like when they're loading, instead of loading, it's having like the name of the image or the description of what the image is like being posted instead of the actual image.
We're
So that's
supposed to be objective, but Chad Connerly literally runs a Facebook campaign. Pretty, you know
mhm.
it. Just derive the rest
Yeah.
of what.
There was a guy who did this in Catawba County where I used to live.
Okay, sorry, quick.
Where
Sorry to interrupt. We have our first results out of the second district. We have Karen Carter Peterson is in the lead right now with 38.1% of the vote. Troy Carter about 2.5 points behind with 35.7% of the vote. And Gary Chambers in third right now with 19.6%. Claston Bernard at 1.57%. So
which
I
parish is this
believe
one from? Is this from Baton Rouge or is this from?
I'm checking. I think it's yeah, it's from East Baton Rouge, which would make sense because East Baton Rouge is not Troy Carter country, to put it bluntly. This is Gary Chambers country. This is where Gary Chambers is from, but apparently at the moment so far that hasn't meant much. And if anyone's like, why are the Republicans doing so badly? It's because East Baton Rouge Parish, frankly, hates Republicans. In the last election, it was in the last election, the Republican nominee against Cedric Richmond, I forget his name. He did win St. Charles Parish, but he finished behind not one, but two third-party candidates in East Baton Rouge Parish. He came in 5th place. That's how small the Republican base is in that parish. So
yeah, keep in mind, all the Republican parts are in other districts. All the even remotely parts. St. George's, for example, it's not necessarily a Republican area. It's a competitive area, but it's very affluent and very white.
Yeah, the East and West Baton Rouge portions were specifically designed to be essentially to take in as much of the black vote as possible.
Mm-hmm. And there's actually additional ones, according to the New York Times, which now has Troy Carter in the lead, off of the basis of a parish that is not East Baton Rouge, St. John the Baptist Parish. He's pulling 58% of the vote in that parish. This is about in the middle of the district. It's right next to St. John and St. Charles Parish. There's lots of parishes in Louisiana with Saint in the name. Kind of tracing back to that French Catholic heritage.
In the 5th district, Julia Letlow has increased her lead with now 60% of the vote. Christophe has fallen to 30.4%, and Connerly has risen to 6.4%. So real quick, while you guys wait, I'm going to look up parish level results because I would like a map so it's easier to see than with Decision Desk. Though
yeah, I'm looking at New York Times just to look at what they show, and Christophe is actually losing right now. Yeah, she's actually losing Kansas Parish, which I think is a Democratic-leaning parish. It's one of those tiny rural counties.
Yeah, we're going to be tracking the powerhouse parishes. Like I said in the 5th, the powerhouses are Tangipahoa, St. Landry, Rapides, and Ochita. So let me pull that up.
But looking at the ones right now, you would expect Handy Christophe to be doing very well in those African-American tiny rural counties that are adjacent to Mississippi, but she's actually losing one of them right now. I could be wrong about how competitive Kansas Parish is. I believe that's its name. I don't know how to pronounce it. But these are all very, very small, like tiny, thousands, below 10,000 people.
Yeah, most of the Mississippi border ones on the southern half have only a couple hundred votes each election, maybe 1,000 total.
It's similar to actually ones on the Mississippi side of the border, where they're very small, very rural parishes with honestly very, very poor qualities of life in some areas. Some of the poorest counties or parishes in the country are in that Mississippi River Delta area. And yeah, I was right. Tensas is actually it's a parish that went for Joe Biden by about 6 points. Republicans almost wanted to know 4. They almost wanted to know 4, but it's a Democratic-leaning majority African-American parish, 56%.
Yeah, so all of the ones, especially when you look at the ones on the southern part of the Mississippi border, St. Helena and East Feliciana Parish, those are both Democratic parishes. So it makes sense that Christophe's winning them. Arguably the same with East Carroll and Madison Parish. And as well, St. Landry Parish just came in. And St. Landry Parish is another one of the spots where we're going to have to wait and see what happens because St. Landry is one of the powerhouse parishes.
We have additional ones in the second, according to the New York Times, from Iberville Parish, which has Troy Carter ahead 35-20 over Karen Carter Peterson, and Assumption Parish, which has him up 55-21 over Karen Carter Peterson. Again, Claston Bernard is in third place in those two parishes. Gary Chambers and St. John the Baptist is in third, and in East Baton Rouge. So right now it's actually Gary Chambers and then Claston Bernard at 5%, taking up about 5% of the vote. Troy Carter, according to the New York Times, 42%, 30% for Karen Carter Peterson.
We still have to wait on election day votes, obviously, because, as I said, 50% of the total votes cast in this race are mail-in votes, and those are the votes that are being counted first. I will say,
and I don't want to call anything. Oh, sorry.
No, I will say that Gary Chambers, at the end of the night, if Gary Chambers is not at least in second place or winning in East Baton Rouge, then that's a complete bust, and there's no way he's making it to the runoff. If he can't even succeed in his home base, then I just don't see his appeal in the rest of the district.
And it's worth noting, we're not going to call anything this early, but Julia Letlow's performance is very, very indicative that she has a very, very good chance, if not favored at this point, to take the race with over 50% of the vote.
Yeah,
she's well beyond that threshold.
And that would line up with our expense. That would line up with our expectations as well in terms of the predictions.
Yeah. It would honestly save Louisiana taxpayers some money for having to hold another general election for this district. We don't want to call it this early. There are some additional parishes that have not reported fully yet, but unless Chad Connerly starts pulling more,
the election day vote first, just some.
Yeah, I mean, just in case there's some late Chad Connerly wave or something.
Yeah,
but none of these other Republicans are getting. The only other Republican over 1% is Robert Lanston. He's at 1%. These other Republicans are taking up 0.1% of the vote each. And this is like 28
with the other Democrats in the second district.
People seem to be realizing that these other candidates are not really serious candidates with a serious chance of winning in a jungle primary like this.
Yeah. And remember, I mean, turnout is frankly going to be abysmal. I mean, we're looking at just very bad turnout overall. The only
and keep in mind, Claston Bernard is a Republican.
Sorry, I'm just saying, if you're a supporter of mail-in voting, though, this election definitely looks good for you.
I was going to say Claston Bernard, just to clarify, is a Republican, not a Democrat. It's not a surprise he'll be doing much better in these other parishes that are not East Baton Rouge. We have another parish that has results in right now, Ascension Parish, which is between Iberville and Assumption. It's again somewhere it's in the middle, snaky portion of the seat. Right now, according to the New York Times, Troy Carter 41%, Karen Carter Peterson 32%. Claston Bernard at 11%. So outside of East Baton Rouge, Gary Chambers is getting virtually no support, not enough to make the top three. Certainly not the top two.
And this is what we expect, because if anything, the only place where Gary Chambers has a political base, that's essentially just East Baton Rouge and possibly West Baton Rouge. But he's from East Baton Rouge, and at the moment he's still in third place. So we're going to have to wait and see. As for Claston Bernard as a Republican, I am curious to see if we see a similar dynamic to what we saw in November, kind of like a reverse North Carolina. If after the election day votes are counted, maybe Claston Bernard increases a little bit. Obviously, you never know in a seat that's this Democratic, but it's worth looking at.
And keep in mind, what he's talking about for those who are unfamiliar, since we do have a little bit of time to talk about here, people want to talk about on election day Democratic votes coming in last in flipping states. One, that's complete nonsense. Two, the exact opposite happened in North Carolina. In North Carolina, we count our early votes.
Because North Carolina,
we count our early votes. Yeah, we count our early votes first, and then the Republican votes came in, and they usually are enough to overturn the Democratic leads. By the logic of the people who are talking about overturning elections because late Democratic votes came in, which are really early votes, they would have to give North Carolina to the Democrats because the late Trump votes that came in flipped the state.
Sorry,
it's nonsense.
I just want to bring in. I'll let you finish. It's just really quick. It's St. Charles Parish. Now, this is important because St. Charles Parish is the most Republican and the only Republican parish in this district. It was the only one to vote against Richmond last time, and it's been the most Republican parish since this district was drawn. It has increased Claston Bernard's total a little bit to about 8%, but right now Claston Bernard is in fourth place still behind I misread that. He's in second place, which makes sense. So in St. Charles, he's in second place. And I just wanted to report that because that's part of the reason why Claston Bernard's total went up.
Big drop from Orleans Parish, but it's not enough for what Troy Carter's going to want to win outright. That is,
And I was just
Orleans Parish drop. Yeah,
yeah, it was
the
funny
Orleans Parish drop.
because I was saying that
Sorry.
Claston Bernard is at 8% now, district wide, because of that his second place position right now in St. Charles. But then, right as I say that, Orleans drops and he goes back down to 4%.
Yeah, now he's at 4. So Orleans Parish is the biggest parish. It's the one we're looking at the most. Troy Carter, 49.8% of the vote. That's mathematically not enough for him to clear this election outright. Right now, he's at 46.7%. So very close to that 50%
still higher than we thought.
Yeah. Karen Carter Peterson's at 31% of the vote. It's not terrible for Karen Carter Peterson. It could be, I mean, obviously it might be enough for her to make a runoff. And then Gary Chambers is at 13%. Claston Bernard, I can't see where he's at, but he's not in the top 3.
We just have to remember that even his performance now, number one, Carter winning this outright, just highly unexpected. And if it does happen, it's still pretty amazing. Remember, most of the polling in General Logic had him in the 30s and had, Peterson in the 20s. So it's kind of odd to see just how weak the other Democratic contenders have been. In fact, the only thing that's accurate right now is Gary Chambers at 12.7%. That about lines up, or roughly lines up, with most of the predictions we had for Gary Chambers. As for Claston Bernard, it's still too early. We're going to have to see with Election Day votes, but it is a pretty big underperformance. If he doesn't win St. Charles Parish with a divided Democratic field, then the odds of him even getting to a runoff they already look pretty slim, but pretty much impossible if he can't win St. Charles. Because keep in mind, St. Charles Parish went Republican last election with a unified Democratic electorate, let alone a split one like this.
Yeah, and so the only 2 parishes we have no results from right now, according to the New York Times, are St. James Parish, which is in the middle again, and then Jefferson Parish, which is right next to Orleans Parish. It's another parish we're keeping an eye on. The portion there is Democratic, although the parish as a whole, I believe, is competitive or Republican leaning. But the portion that's in there is the Democratic portion.
Jefferson is Carter country. From what I've heard from John Couvillon, Carter Peterson has no political friends, only enemies there, and has no chance of winning it. So you're going to see a big jump in Carter votes with Jefferson. And if anything, if he holds in Orleans, maybe he'll make up for it in Jefferson, where part of his Senate district also extends.
And another thing to keep in mind that I'm looking at for the 5th is that basically – the areas that Julia Letlow are performing the best in are in that central Louisiana portion. Parishes like Catahoula, Franklin, Richland, West Carroll, Lincoln. These places, she's all getting well over 60, 70, 80% of the vote. She actually has 81% of the vote in LaSalle Parish right now. These are very, very, very big margins for her, and that's what she's going to need to avoid having to run, having to do another election against Candy Christofi, which would again be nothing other than a waste of time for her getting to Congress because the race is not competitive. The other areas though the areas that are closer to New Orleans or East Baton Rouge are where she's struggling a little bit more. 53% in Washington, 44% in another one. St. Helena, East Feliciana are ones Christofi's doing very well in, but she's still pulling over 50% of the vote in even these parishes. At least the ones that she's winning. The ones that Christofi is winning, obviously, she's not pulling 50%.
I think we should briefly, to add to your good analysis there, just look at the powerhouse parishes again. So if you look at a parish, I'm on New York Times right now, if I can pull it up. A parish like Tangipahoa, Letlow's up by 20 points plus there. If you go to Rapides Parish, up by 23 points. If you go to Ochita, it's not in yet. Essentially, the only one where she isn't in the lead right now is St. Landry Parish, and that's where Candy Christophe is ahead by 9 points. But the other parishes, I mean, especially St. Helena and East Feliciana, those are traditionally Democratic parishes. I think East Feliciana and Helena both went Democratic in November in the House contest there.
The portion that's in there, at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would, again, we're not going to make a projection at this point, but Julia Letlow is doing very well. And I would be surprised if she did not clear that 50% margin. But again, we're waiting for those election day results to come in. Chad Connerly would need to double or triple his vote total to make it, to make a run at this thing. To make it
silent Connerly voters. I don't think Connerly is going to become the next Lauren Boebert or something.
Yeah. And I was going to say the thing I was mentioning with these Facebook campaigns is that they tend to do very well on Facebook. In real life, they do pretty poorly. There's a guy who was running for county commissioner in Catawba County, where I used to live in North Carolina, on a single-handed I'm a Trump supporter campaign. Yard signs everywhere. If you were online, you saw him all the time, his messages, and he finished like a distant sixth out of however many candidates were there. The three Republicans who made it, and the three Democrats ahead of him all actually campaigned in real life. Went to talk to people. Running a Facebook campaign sounds great, but it really does not work in real life. Even someone like an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when she won her primary, she didn't win it because of Facebook. She won it because she campaigned in real life and talked to people. If you actually want to win as an underdog, you can't just be on Facebook and talk about being against the establishment or something. It's just not a feasible way to win campaigns. And we actually have Jefferson Parish results coming in. 48% of the vote for Troy Carter from Jefferson Parish, 21% for Karen Carter Peterson, and at Chelsea Ardoin at 9%. She's a Republican, so that's not great for Claston Bernard's chances. Actually, it's close between him and Ardoin.
Yeah, basically
5% for him.
You have to remember that when we look at the mail-ins, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but just it's over half of the total votes. So at this point, Claston Bernard is done. The odds of him getting to a runoff have gone to 0.
Yeah, and the field is fractured. Republicans have not coalesced behind him. There's actually 2 other Republicans that have over 2.5% of the vote. He's at 5% right now. So if he's done, you can put a fork in him.
It lines up as well with what I've heard, that obviously it is a VRA seat, but the Republican electorate in the district is going to be more white, and white voters have not been as enthused to vote in this race when you compare them against the African American population. Black voters
they don't have a president on the ticket. They don't have a senator on the ticket.
Black voters have turned out more in this election, especially in Orleans Parish in the early vote, and that's what we expect on election day. The Republican turnout is going to be very weak because, honestly, the Republicans in this district, they just don't have anything to vote for.
Yeah, there's no President Trump at the top of the ticket. There's not a senator at the top of the ticket. There's no other House representatives to vote for. You just basically be going to vote for the Republican who's not going to win, which is quite understandable why Republicans would not be voting in that scenario.
Yeah, especially with the possibility that there could be another election if it goes to a runoff like we expect. Also, another grave to dig. I would dig the grave for Gary Chambers as well, who, as John Couvillon predicted, has at this point seemed to have flopped. And as Eric said, you can put a fork in him too, because if he's not winning his home base in East Baton Rouge, which already only makes up 15% of the district, there's no way he's going to get to a runoff.
He's doing respectably there. He's pulling 20%. The problem is everyone else is pulling 40%.
Yeah, I know, but that doesn't. It doesn't work well wide. It's a problem.
Yeah, who would have thought that being a candidate from the least important part of that district in terms of metropolitan area would not be a winnable strategy?
And we add this to the list of races where people think money can make a difference, because Gary Chambers has received a ton of social media attention from progressives and raised a lot of money, but that has not had an effect on this result at this point. And again, when we look at the remaining results, we're looking at Orleans and Jefferson parishes, and I'm not even being biased at this point. Gary Peters. Oh my God, I'm sorry, guys. Gary Chambers. Gary Chambers has no electoral base outside of Baton Rouge. So when you only have an electoral base in Baton Rouge and you're not winning Baton Rouge, you're done. You're not even in second place. He's in third place. Yes. Yeah. I mean, Gary Peters made his appearance in the second district, guys. He's running. He's going to win.
Yeah. To put this into perspective, in St. John the Baptist, he's running third, which sounds impressive, but third is 8% there. Troy Carter is 58% there.
8% of the vote in a section of the district that accounts for 15% of the total electorate. It's not looking good.
I will say this. This is interesting. This is interesting here. St. Charles Parish, like he mentioned, Harrison mentioned, is the least Democratic portion. Claston Bernard is in second now. He's at 21%. But again, if he wanted to make the runoff, he need to be winning this portion, and he's not.
He needs to be winning pretty handily, because remember, if you haven't understood this yet, the last general election between Cedric Richmond and a Republican, St. Charles Parish went to the Republican, I think by over 10% of the vote, with just the unified Republican v. Democrat. But if you look at this race, you've got almost a dozen Democratic candidates and only a few Republican candidates, and Claston Bernard isn't winning. That's very bad news. Not only would Bernard have to be winning St. Charles pretty handily, he'd have to be doing three things: winning St. Charles handily, dominating his other Republican opponents, which he's not. The Adroin candidate is, I believe, very close to his total. And third, he'd have to be winning some other parishes like St. James and Assumption that are somewhat potable in terms of the voter attitude toward Republicans. And that's not happening. So I think, again, we're not going to call it, but just early takes on the night, they line up with our expectations. At this point, it looks highly likely we're going to have a Carter-Peterson runoff, though Carter is doing better than I and the rest of us expected in terms of getting a greater percentage of the vote. And Letlow appears to be on track at the moment. We're going to have to wait and see for sure, but at the moment, as Wasserman would say, I've seen enough to winning this in the first round.
Well, that's surprising. I will say this, Chelsea Ardwan, I'd never heard of her, but her website is at least competent. It's designed competently. It even has a Spanish version of the website, which is actually pretty impressive for a Republican in Louisiana to have a Spanish version of their website. Maybe she's doing a little bit more campaigning than the other guy is.
And it's funny because the Louisiana GOP endorsed Claston Bernard and basically touted him. Joseph Cow, the ex-Republican congressman from the old version of this district, also endorsed him. So honestly, I think this is kind of someone shot someone in the foot here in terms of Bernard underperforming expectations and Adroin overperforming expectations. Or Ardoin, sorry, not Adroin, or whatever.
I'm assuming that's your pronunciation. I don't know French, so
it's probably Ardwan.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking Ardwan. But
I know English, and I've studied Spanish, and I study German. I don't study French, so don't ask me about French.
I'm like day 5 of Duolingo Spanish. I know a few words. So
yeah, I just studied German in my personal time, and I'm going to study it in college, but Spanish is just in school, but not French. So Adroin is good enough for me. But back to elections, because we don't want to bore our viewers. Again, Troy Carter at 46.7%. That's pretty impressive. It shows that the polls were, as we might expect, completely incorrect. There was one poll that showed Peterson only a point behind someone like Carter. That did not pan out. You look perplexed, Derek. What's going on? Anything interesting that you spotted?
Oh, no, nothing interesting. No, nothing interesting, really.
Although results are now in from all the parishes in the second. And as you might expect in Jefferson, Peterson is being demolished, just steamrolled in Jefferson, which lines up with the parish president in Jefferson basically saying, vote for Troy Carter, everybody. And it worked. And Carter's winning by 27 points, which is very, very, very large.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out why Chelsea Ardwan would be doing better in Jefferson Parish. She's about 9% there, which is pretty impressive for, fractured Republican field. Whereas in St. Charles, Claston Bernard's at 21%. I'm just trying to figure out why, in particular, this kind of fractured Republican field, because you get these unusual results.
I don't know if it's necessarily. So just to answer the question, we're using RRH for precinct results, which we linked, and we're using Decision Desk and New York Times for the parish level results. So not Politico at the moment. The question is,
the downside of New York Times is I can't find. Sorry.
Someone said they visited Claston Bernard's website, and I was wondering whose website is more broken, Chad Connerly or Claston Bernard.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is the reason I was trying to figure out how these candidates are doing is you can only see the top 3 on New York Times. It only shows the top 3 candidates in each parish, and I believe they only have Gary Chambers at the top level. So it's not that easy to figure out the races we're looking for here.
The only parishes where, well, let me put it this way. So in most of these parishes, where at least the ones with the heaviest black populations, we're looking at Troy Carter, Peterson, and Chambers in the top 3. And some of the other ones like Iberville, Ascension, Assumption, St. Charles, someone like Claston Bernard is either in 3rd place or 2nd place, and Gary Chambers is out of the top 3. But if you look at some place like Jefferson, which is interesting, as Eric was trying to find out, we might have to wait for more election day vote. Chelsea Ardwan is above Bernard and is actually in 3rd place. And that's the only parish where Ardoin is in the top 3.
Mm-hmm. I would suspect maybe she probably lives there or is probably running exclusively in that area, which would not be surprising for a minor candidate in a field like this. I mean, you'll find single county candidates running in elections, especially in places like Pennsylvania where they list the county on the ballot. It's not surprising to just focus your efforts on one area.
And the other thing that John Couvillon mentioned as well is the alphabetic nature of these ballots. So everything is alphabetized. Mm-hmm. All the candidates are listed alphabetically. And I'm not trying to blame voters or say voters are uninformed, but you'd be shocked how many voters will actually just vote alphabetically for the first Republican or the first Democrat. Mm-hmm. So in Jefferson, Ardoin might be doing better in Jefferson simply because Republicans that are voting are like, I don't know either of these Republican candidates, but A comes before B, so I will be voting for Ardoin.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at CNN to figure out, and this is fascinating. St. Charles Parish, we talked about, the one Republican parish in this district. Clashton Bernard has 21%, Chelsea Ardoin has 12%, and Greg Lorette has 11%. Those are 3 major Republicans running, or at least 3 of the Republicans running.
Still, if you combine the Republican vote.
It's not great. It's like 11% of the vote.
This district... Well, the Democrats in the 5th and the Republicans in the 2nd. They're not doing too well. I mean, these aren't competitive seats.
Yeah, but it's surprisingly fractured. Clashton Bernard has 5.2% at the whole district level. Chelsea Ardoin has 4%, 3.8%, and Greg Lorette has 2.7%. So basically, Republicans just don't care and are just voting for one candidate. Yeah. Whereas Democrats are, Troy Carter is at almost 47%. Really, really good performance for him. And it portends well for his chances in a runoff election, assuming he can't get those votes he needs from Orleans Parish, where he's again only
strong performance for Carter. He's almost at 50. Most of us expected him not to cross 40. That was uncommon.
And he's at 47.9% in Jefferson Parish, which again, really, really good.
Well, that's expected. But Peterson and Chambers, district wide, their totals are about what we expected. But Carter at almost 50, that is impressive.
And Chambers is doing horribly in Jefferson Parish. He's at 6th place right now, behind the 3 Republican candidates running, which again, Chelsea Ardoin, 9%, Clashton Bernard, 7%, Greg Lorette, 6%. Those are the 3 Republicans right there. And then he's behind all of them. And he actually spent money in this race. Mm-hmm. Which is that's not great. That's not a great effective use of your money.
Yeah, and looking at Decision Desk right now, I think it's roughly, in terms of reporting, it's about 3% of the vote reporting in both districts at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is,
and there's only one there's only one parish left that hasn't reported from the 5th. Forgive me if I butcher the name. It's Wachita Parish. It's where Monroe is. It's one of the more important counties to pay attention to, which is why, again, we're being conservative with talking about the 5th. Even though Julia Letlow is doing very well right now, we're waiting for way more results to come in, because you do not call a race at 3% of the vote. You just don't.
I laugh sometimes with Louisiana, because if we lost a follower for every time one of us said county instead of parish, we'd be done. No followers left. And people have talked about the HD82 race. I'm going to be honest, we haven't been following that race. We're just focusing on the 2 congressional special elections. But we'll be happy to take a look at that race and talk about it in our post-election show tomorrow evening. But it is indeed divided by only 4 votes, which is pretty close. Are you getting anything on the RRH precinct level results?
I haven't seen them come up yet. I think he said that they were maybe going to be in about 30 minutes. 30 minutes in. I'm seeing results coming in on them, but I don't see the precinct level stuff yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's already amazing what they've done there with precinct results.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to post the link again in here. Just
California 25. So
yeah, I'm going to post the link here again just so you can see it. I'm going to post it here. Go to RRH Live Elections live blog. Cine 9C will be posting eventually these results, so you can follow along there and have that up on your side as you can kind of see what we're talking about here. We're waiting for more results to come out. Obviously, these election day votes. But yeah, good start for Troy Carter. Really good start for Julia Letlow, as expected. And Karen Carter Peterson. The most likely scenario in the fifth is again, or second is looking again like a Troy Carter, Karen Carter Peterson runoff, which was expected. The most likely scenario.
Altogether, these
we are kind of
they're sticking to form.
We are kind of surprised. The one thing I think we are surprised by is the Republicans were not coalescing around that one Republican that was deemed to be more credible. But that's not that surprising in a low care primary race.
Yeah, in a Democratic district.
Yeah, very Democratic district.
There really isn't that much of a Republican base. I think, well, a lot of people just expected Claston Bernard to have the votes unify around him in terms of the Republicans because he was endorsed by the Louisiana party. But it's not like New Jersey where you actually get your ballot placement based on how many, which county lines you win. Like, for example, if you win the Somerset County Republican endorsement, you're at the top of the ballot in Somerset County, and most of the voters will click on you. And underneath your name in New Jersey, it says Somerset County Republican Committee endorsed. And it says that for everything, depending on what county you're in, and it always has your line and organizational tie based off which line you win in our state. It's not like that where Claston Bernard can, let's say, oh, he won the state party's endorsement. That would be listed in New Jersey for the county win. That's called winning the county line. That's why we're a machine state. And that's why whoever wins a county line usually wins in that county because voters will see that. But, they definitely haven't seen anything like that here.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're just waiting. Hopefully some election day votes will be coming in soon. Wichita Parish is the only one right now that doesn't have any results. And that is one of the...
And that is, again, that's an important one. That is an important one.
It's one of the four that were mentioned as important parishes.
I think someone mentioning in the comments they're taking a look at the website for, I believe, Connerly and saying that it's just talking points. Again, you're running a Facebook campaign. I mean, what do you expect?
That's how you win Facebook campaigns. I mean, Facebook is literally the definition of attention-grabbing talking point posts and things that don't make any sense. So,
yeah. Again, something that works well in Facebook does not necessarily work well in a campaign in real life.
No, not at all. Definitely,
we've seen that on Twitter in the past elections, where with some elections, we've seen all sorts of things. Social media is a way to campaign, it's not a replacement for campaigning. Let's just put it that way.
If anything, it's the opposite. Usually, if you do really well in social media, it means that the people who are actually voting. Okay, keep in mind, guys. I know you have the stereotype that a lot of old people are on Facebook, and it is true. But at the same time, the electorate is older here. You're not on social media as much. Some people are. Some older people definitely are from personal experience. But overall, I would say people are less tech savvy at this electoral age, but more inclined to politically participate. But again, a 65-year-old electorate, that's a pretty old electorate in the mainstream.
And one thing I want to mention that I'm seeing in the comments here, which is the practical implication of tonight. What happens if both races are called tonight? Well, that means it's a 220 to 212 delegation, with Republicans having 212 and Democrats having 220. If the Democrats do not manage to get a candidate through tonight, which it appears they may not be able to do, then Republicans would only be 7 seats as opposed to 8. Yeah. And then with Ron Wright, whenever that election happens, that will almost certainly go to a runoff. There's no way any candidate's able to get 50% of the vote in that race.
When we say almost certain in Texas 6th, the only reason we can't say life or death bet this is the 100% chance of happening is because this is journalism and we can't say that. But when you have almost 20 plus candidates on the ballot, there's no way one of them is getting over 50%. It's just it's hard to see. I don't even think
even if you coalesce all of the Democratic support in one candidate, all the Republican support in one candidate, like county organizations, politicians, federal, state, local, everyone.
Republican, and Fernandez, I think, is the top Democrat. But you've got like another additional 10 candidates. It's really hard to see. And that election, I believe, is in May, I think. That's when the Texas 6 race is. The first round of voting is in May.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's right. I have to check when I do my update.
And for those who think that's a bit late, well, thankfully you don't live in Ohio, where the vacancy there will not be filled until November.
November. That's so funny.
That happens sometimes. Like, it's a legitimate political tool. I think they did the same thing in California. They stalled a political race there.
I mean, at least in the Senate, you can appoint interim senators. So obviously, Vice President Harris's seat is filled by Alex Padilla until the 2022 race can actually, he can stand for election. But the House,
and this is also why having a 50-50 Senate is so not great all around, because one vacancy means the Senate could flip hands. We don't want to talk about that sort of perspective here, obviously, but in the House that doesn't happen. Someone you could replace a senator in a 50-50 Senate very quickly. If it was an evenly split House or so, one vacancy could take 6 months to a year to fill a vacancy in the House. It's just we don't usually have that close races. The House we have right now is actually very historically close in terms of recent modern history. You don't usually see House races overall being within 10 seats.
It's as close as it was in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Again, though, tonight's elections, if the election day votes match the sympathies of the mail-in votes, which make up the first half of the total votes, then we're probably not going to see very much change here.
Mm-hmm. I think it is worth noting
For Ohio, there was the option of having a May primary and an August general election, or an August primary and a November general election, and they went with the latter option, not the former. So having an August-November setup.
And I want to make sure Harrison says this is right. Would Julia Letlow actually be the first Republican woman to represent Louisiana in the Congress?
Yeah, I think that is correct, because you had Lindy Boggs, who was a very prominent congresswoman from Louisiana, who also replaced her husband, as I said earlier, Hale Boggs, who was on track to become Speaker of the House, or Hal Boggs, died in a plane crash with Nick Begich in Alaska during a campaign session. And Lindy Boggs won the seat. So Democratic woman congresswoman, but yeah, I think that's correct. Luke Letlow would be the first female Republican. Julia Letlow.
And yes, if you're wondering if that Nick Begich is related to Mark Begich, the former senator, yes. They are relatives. Yeah. You see this all the time in politics like this, where you have politicians coming back that are related to other people. So yes, that is something you would see a lot.
I mean, another good example, the Udall family is one of the best examples, because you had Tom Udall from New Mexico, and then Mark Udall in Colorado was his cousin, I believe, and Gordon Smith, who was the senator from Oregon before he lost to Jeff Merkley, was also related to the Udall
Republican senator. So you had two Democrats and a Republican.
No, I know, but I was from Oregon.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, Gordon Smith from Oregon. Yeah, the Republican. Or even more in Colorado, you had John Salazar and Ken Salazar, who were brothers. One senator, one in the House.
Or in New Jersey on the legislative level, for any New Jersey
here we go, Julia Letlow,
Tony Bucco Sr. and Tony Bucco Jr. both in the Senate.
Yeah. And I was mentioning Julia Letlow. She's actually over 60% of the vote now, according to the Washington Post, which I'm looking at because they have the full county level results as opposed to the top 3 that New York Times is showing. But she is over 60% of the vote now, with about, according to CNN, about 16, or according to Washington Post, about 16% of the vote in. Whereas Troy Carter is down to about 44% of the vote, which is good, but it's not enough to meet that runoff threshold that we've talked about. And Karen Carter Peterson, according to this, is again still in the lead in that East Baton Rouge parish by around 4% of the vote. Chambers is now up to 24% of the vote in East Baton Rouge parish. Sorry.
It's fine. I mean, parish, if you mispronounce it to be Paris like I did, close enough, honestly, given the history of New Orleans. Basically is Paris in America.
And, Bernard's picking up a few votes, too. He's up to around 7% now. He's taken back third place in Jefferson Parish. 11%, with another 8% going to Chelsea Ardwan, which she had been previously been in the third place in that one. The third place is now, again, back to Claston Bernard. So the Republican vote total is back up to about 13, 14% now. Not bad, but not enough to make that runoff. We're not seeing that fractured Democratic field that the people had been thinking could be possible. These minor Democrats are not getting 2% of the vote. They're getting 0.5% of the vote. So even though there's a lot of them, it's not adding up to much.
Yeah. And now we wait, because we still have a lot of votes to be counted, both mail-in and election day. Although from what I heard last night, by 11 p.m., the pace should have picked up enough to a point where we should have enough votes to make a projection. But yeah, until we can make projections and get you guys the conclusions that you're looking for, we'll be here on the stream to answer your questions and to report results and have a good time, because that's what elections are about with us, casual and factual.
Yeah. And Letlow is actually up to 68.5% now. I think the question would be, what could she get maximum in total? We had thought getting over 50% was pretty likely. She's up to 61% now. She actually just keeps gaining votes.
I also want to point out that Christoph is technically underperforming, because Democrats make up about 35% of the vote in this district, and she's only at 30% right now, which is, I'm going to be honest, kind of bad, given the fact that this district this time around has yielded no other Democratic challenger. She is the only candidate, the sole Democratic candidate in this race.
Yeah, Letlow has a decisive. We're still waiting a little bit to make sure. Again, 25% of the vote in. Abundance of caution. It's not like there's a race to determine this.
We're not going to see Chad Connerly coming back.
Yeah, but I think Brian Elections made an interesting comment, which again is that Julia Letlow lives in Richland Parish. She's doing very well there, but she works at the University of Louisiana Monroe, which is in Wachita Parish, which is again the one that's not reported yet. Fun fact, Louisiana Monroe, I actually know them. Their college. We play them in football quite a bit. I went to App State for college, and we're in the Sun Belt. Monroe is traditionally they've been a decent competitor, at least, although Lafayette has kind of overtaken them there. In terms of the football school, that is. But yeah, if these numbers keep getting better for Letlow, she's looking like she's in a very, very solid position.
All right, so we're going to project Julia Letlow as winner in the 5th District to win on the first round of voting, avoiding the need for a runoff altogether. Julia Letlow, the widow of the late Congressman-elect Luke Letlow, after that tragic incident, will now succeed her husband and win the 5th District without the need for a runoff. She's over 60% of the vote right now, and it appears that the sky is the limit. We wish her the best of luck. The Republicans successfully coalesced around her campaign. Overall, at least at the federal level, she had the advantage. She campaigned very well, and she successfully was able to capitalize on winning, as you can see, a very, very large amount of the Republican vote. The sympathy vote was strong, and her campaign was strong. And we don't have an assured outcome in the second yet, but at this point, given her lead, the odds of Letlow, falling below 50% appear very, very low at this point. So that race will be decided without a runoff, according to our projection.
Mm-hmm. And a really impressive showing from Letlow. Again, this is without Wachita Parish in. She is just pulling very, very strong margins in these vote-rich, heavy portions of Louisiana's 5th. I do want to mention a couple comments here. Someone asked if we saw the tweet from Candy Christoffi where she confused Democratic Party ID with Democratic Party registration and said she was close to winning. Yes, I did, and it was funny, just as funny as when Pan Keith did it. Some people seem to confuse party registration is a horrible indicator of how people actually vote. It's just really, not. Yeah.
West Virginia and Kentucky should be Democratic states.
Yeah, North Carolina, even Eastern North Carolina, still has a lot of Democrats who are registered as Democrats vote for Republicans for literally everything. Alexander County, which I live in right now, is a county that went for Donald Trump with over 70% of the vote. but it has a Democratic sheriff. But it would never in a million years vote for a Democrat for Congress.
People are lazy and that they don't change their party registration. It's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. And I thought this was a thoughtful comment. I'll show it here and highlight it since we're kind of in a medium here. How much should we take away from these races re the national environment? How informative are special elections at this stage about how the midterms will go? I'll let Harrison speak to this, but I also have we've mentioned this earlier in the show, though.
Yeah, so just briefly, these races tell us about primary dynamics. So I talked a lot about this morning. These districts aren't competitive in general elections. So even if the second district, it's basically impossible at this point. Even if both of these districts did end up in runoffs where you had one Republican and one Democrat, they're too lopsidedly safe for one of the respective parties to, yield a result that could be of merit for 2022. And you have to also remember that redistricting plays a role. So we don't exactly know how these districts are going to look, especially in Louisiana, where we could get an additional Democratic district. So this early, I would say that Texas 6 could shed a little light on how congressional races and the momentum might be going in 2022. Same with New Mexico 1. But again, we have to wait on redistricting. I'd look and wait for more competitive races. If we get any House special elections that occur in 2022, those could definitely foreshadow some good developments for Republicans in the midterms in 2022. But we have to wait and see. If you get new maps, new districts, and the special elections are held under those lines, then they could definitely be important. Just like we saw in 2018 with a lot of special elections leading up to the Democratic wave in the 2018 midterms. Democrats have been doing well in a lot of normally solidly Republican districts. Even if they didn't win them, they did better than expected. You saw that in South Carolina and in Arizona. And obviously Connor Lamb's victory is another great example of that. So possibly. At the moment, I think that primary dynamics are the more interesting thing we can take away from here, especially in urban areas between the different racial groups and which type of Democrat they support. Eric, what did you?
And I would second this as well. Again, really just looking at the dynamics here are more important than the actual top level results. There's not really a whole lot to take away here from a Republican winning in Louisiana 5th or a Democrat winning in Louisiana 2nd. It's just is looking at that turnout, looking at just the coalescence of factors here. I would say Texas 6 would probably be a better predictor of how elections will go in the future. As a nominally competitive district, that one will be more important to look at, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that as well.
But yes, again, we have called Louisiana's 5th district for Julia Letlow. She will win that with a decisive majority of the vote.
Also, Letlow is also winning Helena Parish at St. Helena as well, which is Democratic. So that's funny.
Yeah, probably low turnout, but also sympathy factor. And again, don't dismiss a candidacy because someone is a widow. She has an impressive resume. She's well known in the district. She has a I mean, just because she didn't win this just because she was married to Luke Letlow. She won because she ran a very, very good campaign that united a blanket primary, which is very difficult to do. She has her own pedigree. She has her own degree. She has her own stuff, and that's why she was able to do this. I mean, being the widow of late Representative Health, but getting over 60% is not easy to do in a jungle primary election like this.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, if you look at the latest results, she's up to 62% of the vote now. Candy Christophe is at under 30% of the vote, which is really terrible for a Democrat in this district, actually. It really horrendous total.
That's 5 or 6 points below what you should be performing at.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about turnout, that could be one thing. But again, Republicans are also underperforming where they usually are at in the second.
I think what you're seeing Troy Carter, the minority party in each of these respective districts, whether it be the Republicans or the Democrats, they're both very disenthused. They don't want to vote. They're not interested. And if you're a Democrat in the 5th district or a Republican in the 2nd district, again, not much to vote for in these special elections.
And while I want to get back to no
chance of winning.
I want to get back to the second here because there's some fascinating stuff going on in the second right now. Troy Carter is now down to 40% of the vote. Karen Carter Peterson's at 26%, Gary Chambers at 16%, Claston Bernard at 8%. Chelsea Ardoin's
at St. Charles, though.
Yeah. He is leading with around 31% of the vote right now. two other Republicans that I mentioned earlier are taking about another 20% of the vote. This would be about what we'd expect. This is actually closer to what that parish would normally vote like. But in Jefferson, he's at 45%. In Orleans, he's at 45%. Gary Chambers is pulling around 19% of the vote in Orleans, which is actually pretty good. And he's pulling almost about, I mean, he's pretty close to, actually, if you look at West Baton Rouge Parish, which is, again, one of the ones here, which we hadn't mentioned before, it's actually very, very close in that one. Karen Carter Peterson, 24%, Bernard at 23%, Chambers at 21%, and Carter at 20%.
To be
doing
fair,
very well. Yeah.
Chambers is catching up in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, he's actually above Troy Carter now. He's at 29.5%. Troy Carter's at 28%.
But again, he needs more than the Baton Rouge area to win, even if he takes the lead there, which is something that's not that unexpected. It's actually what we initially expected. And, Claston Bernard, maybe we'll have to wait and see how it goes in terms of the top percentage he gets to.
Yeah. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets over 10%. He's really improving. I mean, he just keeps gaining votes. Probably election day votes, I would think.
Yeah.
And again, Republican vote combining, it's actually not terrible. Chelsea Ardoin and Greg Lorette are polling about 5.1%. And Claston Bernard is polling about 8.2%. So that's around 14% of the vote overall. It's not awful. That's about where you'd expect.
Miles has confirmed what we said earlier about her being the first Republican woman that will go to Congress.
And pretty big achievement.
Yep, that is a big achievement for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, on the Democratic side, you had Lindy Boggs and Mary Landrieu, but never a Republican woman in the Senate or the House. But yeah, Claston Bernard and Gary Chambers, maybe election day votes will kick them into the race just a little more. Not enough to make a difference, but the question now is not, will the 2nd District go to a runoff? It almost certainly will. Just somehow, is it even remotely possible that Gary Chambers could get a second place spot? I guess, but still a long way off. Still about 9 points away from actually taking that second place spot. And there aren't enough votes in the Baton Rouge area to do that. So we are projecting that the 2nd will go to a runoff, which is expected. We just have to wait and see who gets the second place spot. So we're going to project that Troy Carter gets that first place spot in the runoff, but the second place spot we have not decided for sure yet. We still want to wait. So far, if Peterson makes that second place spot, then you're going to form. The elections have stuck completely to form, to what we expected at least. Any new developments you're seeing, Eric?
Not at the moment. What I would say is I've seen a take. I wanted to mention this. One of our friends, Drew Savicki on Twitter, has said that it's possible that Democrats could get a second VRA seat in Louisiana, and that would draw her out. In theory, maybe, but again, she does not live in the portion of that would likely be in a Democratic-leaning version of this district.
She lives in is too Republican to keep in the seat if you want to make it a VRA seat.
Yeah. Again, I'll show that map we showed earlier. She lives in, I believe this was mentioned earlier, she lives closer to Monroe. She lives in Richland Parish. Richland Parish would not be in a Democratic district. Let's just put it that way. She could be potentially drawn in, but again, I've been of the opinion that John Bell Edwards can either get a budget or he can get a second congressional district. The Republicans don't quite have a veto-proof majority, but there's enough Democrats in red districts that probably don't want to risk losing this time by voting for a second Democratic district in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to keep going. Julia Letlow is now at 62% of the vote. Really impressive. Don't minimize her performance because it's a special or because she's the widow of Luke Letlow. She ran a very, very good campaign, just like her husband did. But she ran it on her own.
I mean, the sympathy vote always will play a factor, but again, like John Couvillon pointed out, this is a very boots on the ground district to be successful in. You have to get to know people in the district. You have to meet the people. You have to run ads. You have to connect. And if she hadn't done that, she wouldn't be doing this well.
Yeah. And I want to mention that it appears that Caldwell Parish is all the way in, according to Washington Post, and it's at 100% of precincts in. Letlow has 83%, and she's actually just taken the lead in Madison Parish with 100% of precincts in. So really, really bad night for Democratic turnout in the Valley if that's the case. I'm actually going to highlight this because this is kind of ridiculous. Democrats should not be losing these precincts or these counties right here, or parishes, sorry. I mean, 100% of precincts.
There's no reason for Democrats to turn out in this race. It's just why we've seen Clasten Bernard underperforming. I mean, if you combine the whole Republican vote in this race, it's lower than it was in 2020.
Yeah. But again, I wanted to show this just so you can get an idea of what that looks like. And then you have the other race, which again is very, very fractured on the whole.
Yeah. So we're just waiting on our final projection in terms of who we project will go to the second place spot in that runoff with Troy Carter. And we'll wait, and we'll make the decision soon enough. Right now, if we look at West Baton Rouge, it's entirely in, and Chambers finished in third, but Chambers really needs to be winning East Baton Rouge, and he's still down to Peterson by a significant amount, which shows that the progressive vote has split itself because Chambers and Peterson are the two progressive candidates in this race. So 47.5% of the precincts are in East Baton Rouge Parish, which is roughly half. So if the election day votes don't swing it to Chambers, then Chambers is pretty much done. So we're looking at Parish. East Baton Rouge Parish, I would stick with that. And I'm just going to say this does hold. If any of us say the word county instead of parish, you can just, I don't know, write a formal complaint.
Or an informal complaint, either one.
Yeah. I will be effectively renaming all counties, boroughs, and parishes.
But yeah, if this holds, if Washington Post is indeed accurate, she would have won. Julia Letlow has won Madison Parish, which gave 58% of the vote to Joe Biden back in November.
Yeah, Democratic turnout is abysmal right now. So if we learned anything from this election, turnout for the minority party in a heavily lopsided district in an off-year special election is very bad, and running Facebook campaigns with a website where the image links are all broken does not work. And those are the two takeaways from tonight.
Again, Facebook can be a very valuable part of your campaign. Facebook should not be your entire campaign. You should spend 90% of your time not on Facebook.
This is not a mock government sim after all. Ultimately, getting off Facebook is necessary.
Yes.
And I
Being
think
very online is very bad for your campaign.
Oh, sorry, I laughed. So St. Helena Parish has also gone to Julia Letlow. And that was another one of the more Democratic parishes in the district. So
which one's? I'm trying to find St. Helena.
At least it's right next to East Feliciana, but it voted for Christoph in the last election.
Chad Connerly's kicking butt there. Wow.
Yeah, Chad Connerly's
27%.
Chad Connerly's about to pass Candy Christoph in that one spot.
Yeah, Candy Christoph is at 28%. Chad Connerly's 27%. So apparently, it looks like Chad Connerly did pretty well in the areas around Baton Rouge and New Orleans. He's at 11% in Washington, 23% in Tangif, whatever that one is, and then
I will say I highly doubt at the end of the night when all the votes are tallied that Chad Connerly will be below Candy Christoph in LaSalle Parish. LaSalle Parish really hates Democrats. I don't even know how to describe it nowadays, except It's almost like Glasscock County, Georgia. That's what LaSalle Parish is. Although, ironically enough, they voted for Kathleen Blanco over Bobby Jindal, like most of the rest of the states.
Well, everyone voted. All of the counties voted for
parishes. We have to stop saying counties. I mean,
look at this here. Actually, I'm looking at this. This is nonsense. This county is insane. This gave Republicans 83% of the vote in 64. I'm not obviously in 64, but in 72, 81%. Even Jimmy Carter couldn't win it. And he really did well in Louisiana.
LaSalle Parish is the definition of Republican. It just
is. It's 90% of the vote to Trump. Republicans have actually gained votes here in every election since 1996.
I mean, my friend Armin, who's a Democrat, always points out he wouldn't even want to be caught dead in LaSalle Parish. But yeah, definitely LaSalle Parish, if you want an analogy. It is to Louisiana what Glasscock County is to Georgia. But yeah, the day that a Democrat wins LaSalle Parish. Okay. We can confirm that East Feliciana Parish, the most Democratic parish in the district, has gone to Candy Cristo by 14 votes. Congratulations.
Again, I want to mention this earlier, is that she mentioned the whole Democratic voter advantage. Please do, if you're a Democrat running for Congress, do not mention voter registration numbers. Pam Keith did that, and then she lost by like an enormous margin. I think he was talking about voter fraud.
Honestly, though, that might be a good strategy for the GOP. Just get every Democratic congressional candidate to confuse the two statistics, and then the data will show that they're incorrect. And then they lose. Every Democrat will not win. Someone adds they had to create a new Wikipedia margin color for LaSalle because it was so red.
That's a bra moment right there. But yeah, 62% of the vote for Letlow. Christophe is under 29% now, which is, again, horrendous for a Democrat, because there are actually Democrats in this district. There are areas that vote for Democrats in this district.
Eric, can you keep people occupied for a bit? I'm going to run some numbers. I'm going to combine the Republican vote total in the district with the Democratic vote total for last November, and I'm going to see how the counties would have split.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and I actually want to get back to Louisiana a second, because this is actually interesting.
That map, so we'll be able to show how much Christophe is failing.
What's interesting here is that Troy Carter is under 38% now. Karen Carter Peterson's at 24.6%. Gary Chambers is at 19.6%. He's actually catching up to Karen Carter Peterson. We talked about the absurdity of the Gary Chambers versus Troy Carter race. Might not be that unlikely now. And we have 100% of the votes in from St. Charles. Claston Bernard has indeed won it. The three Republicans have combined to over 50%. Chambers is actually not doing that bad at this point. He's doing pretty decent. All things considered in some of these areas. We're still waiting, obviously, for a lot of stuff to come in, but for relatively, he's spent a lot of money. You'd expect him to be doing a little bit better.
Yeah, so I'll be back momentarily. I'm just plugging these numbers into Excel so I can map something on QGIS pretty quick. So if you don't hear me talking, it's because of that. But I did make the accurate comment that LaSalle Parish eats Democrats for breakfast. So, pretty much.
Yeah, if you wanted to, here's a loading point for you. So if you're a Democrat, if you want to get into the salty spittoon, say you're a Democrat who got 10% of the vote in LaSalle Parish. This place is just not very friendly to Democrats.
Oh my God.
But yeah, according Monroe Parish appears to be 100% in. That's actually pretty terrible for Democrats. I'm not sure if it's a turnout thing or what.
We We can just admit that this whole election has been horrible for the minority party in each of these respective districts.
Yeah. Actually, Madison Parish. Sorry, Madison, not Monroe. Madison Parish is 100% in. This is a 58% Clinton district or Clinton parish, and Julia Letlow won it, which is again not great for the Democrats here. Troy Carter's actually under 38% now. Gary Chambers 19%. Karen Carter Peterson 24%. Republican vote total is actually not terrible. Again, I keep mentioning this. Chelsea Ardoin and Greg Lorette are winning about 6% of the vote. And then Claxton Bernard is another 9.4. There's another couple of Republicans that are another Republicans at 0.5%. They're probably going to combine to around 16, 17% in this district total, which is not bad. That's actually not very bad for Republicans at all. Obviously, they want to coalesce it behind one candidate, but the number of votes they're actually getting is not bad at all.
No.
But it's not going to one candidate. It's going to multiple candidates. Yeah, we keep mentioning this. We said earlier in the show, this is why we don't project this early. We joked that you could stick a fork in Gary Chambers. He's actually doing really well on election day votes, it looks like. This is why, again, you don't project races with 5% of the vote in.
Enough to get into.
I mean, he's at 19%. Karen Carter Peterson's at 24%. I think we can probably say at this point that it's going to go to a new election in this race, that Troy Carter is not going to have the support needed to.
We just are waiting to project the second place finisher.
Yeah.
And I'm almost done with my calculations here, so just a moment.
But again, if you're someone who's really interested in trends, I would not extrapolate Republicans winning a small Democratic-leaning black county in a runoff election or in a special election into anything at all in November. Please, if you're watching this, do not get the impression that Republicans are going to be winning counties that are 60% African American and gave Joe Biden 58% of the vote. Please do not take that, because that is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it is interesting that she has won this county in a low turnout special election.
All right, I'm just going to load up QGIS real quick for you guys, and then I'll give you a quick demonstration of what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, I'm going to highlight this just so people can see this. Special elections do not equal trends ever. Again, the House election in Montana between Greg Gianforte and Rob Quist was 6%. The Senate race was more lopsided than that, 10%. And then the next House race was actually, I think it was about the same margin, but the one after that was not competitive. But yeah, Claxton Bernard, he's close to 10% now. He's actually got 9.6%. Yeah, again, the first real election that would come up would be New Mexico 1. It's the first election that could be remotely competitive. We mentioned this before. It's a district that voted for Joe Biden with around 60% of the vote. The only reason you could say remotely competitive is that similarly Republican-leaning seats proved to be somewhat competitive in special elections under Trump. But Democrats only won one of them, and that was with Connor Lamb running against a really horrendous candidate. And we don't even know who the candidates are going to be in New Mexico. And also, this is the most Democratic seat in New Mexico with a bunch of reliably Democratic Native American voters.
They pick by conventions. Very, very, very weird system in New Mexico.
Yeah. But again, it's also the reason that Connor Lamb could win a seat like that one in Pennsylvania is because it had a lot of Democratic voters who used to vote for Democrats. A lot of the voters in New Mexico 1 are Native Americans who have probably not voted for a Republican ever and would probably not do so in a special election. So I don't think it's in the same category, but if a Republican got 45% of the vote in that race, would not surprise me. 5% overperformance would not be unusual for a special election.
And again, I'm almost done with this. I'm just finding a congressional shape file.
But yeah, actually, Candy Kristoff is actually close to getting below 29% of the vote now, which is, again, really bad. That's not good. It looks like she'll probably win East Carroll Parish, which is probably good, but again, it's one that you should be winning by a big margin. Oh, we may have our first county may have our first parish that Gary Chambers is winning. He's at 27% in Iberville. He's at 27% in Iberville Parish. And then there's this three-way race in West Baton Rouge Parish. Karen Carter Peterson, 24%, Bernard at 22.5%, Gary Chambers at 20.9%, Carter at 20.4%. Is there anyone? I don't know who would be a good candidate because the candidate's going to be chosen by convention. Ron Chetty would be a good candidate if you were running in the Albuquerque seat.
Earlier, they're not chosen by a convention. The nominees are literally chosen by party committees.
Yeah. Correctly. Yeah, if this were the other New Mexico seat, the Albuquerque-based one, I could see Ron Chetty doing pretty good there. Pretty well in that district. But this is the most Democratic one in the state. It's this, and when I say the reason is they're both very similar in terms of how they vote. But the Albuquerque one has people who at least used to vote for Republicans or have voted for them at the state level. Whereas, the first district is a lot of Native American voters. It's rural. It's not an easy one to run in. Is New Mexico one the Albuquerque? No. Oh, yeah, you're right. It is the Albuquerque one. Huh.
It is. It is the Albuquerque.
Oh, yeah. Then I guess it could be more competitive then. I don't know why I don't know why I was thinking it was the third. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That changed my mind then. It could be a little bit more competitive. Not a lot of Native American voters. Yeah, this is the widest one in the state. Apologies for the confusion earlier. This one was represented by, I believe, the 2012 Senate candidate from New Mexico, who did pretty well. Can't remember her name. I think there's the president at UTEP now.
What did you say?
The Senate candidate for New Mexico in 2012.
Heather
Wilson. Heather Wilson was the representative for that seat. Yeah, I think she's the president at UTEP now.
Let me just check real quick if this is correct. Okay, so I have the results, so I'll share my screen. Okay, so what you see here, this is the combined vote total of the Democratic and Republican votes in last November's election. And I'll turn on the parish names as well. One moment. Yeah, so if you combine the Democratic vote, then East Feliciana, Tangipahoa, and I believe that St. Helena would all be Republican here. But when you look at the actual divided field, all three of these were carried by Christoph, even with the split Democratic field in the last election. Now, even with the combined vote, East Carroll and Madison Parish still Democratic. But obviously tonight, Madison Parish has gone Republican. So, we're not extrapolating anything big here. We're not pointing out anything that's going to impact the 2022 midterms. Like we see reversed in the second, we're just looking at low turnout for the opposite party here. But again, this is the combined total vote for both parties last November.
And I just wanted to say Troy Carter is actually below 37% right now. Karen Carter Peterson's at 24%, and Gary Chambers is at 19.9%. So Chambers is actually catching up. I don't know if he has a chance to make it past Karen Carter Peterson, but he's actually pulling 32% of the vote in East Baton Rouge Parish right now. West Baton Rouge is pulling above Troy Carter. He's making inroads in Orleans and in Jefferson parishes a little bit, or at least Orleans Parish.
I still hold all the votes. He has to win East Baton Rouge to win, to get into the second place spot.
Yeah. And we actually have several parishes that are 100% in right now. St. Charles, Claston Bernard, 33% of the vote. St. John the Baptist, Troy Carter, 48% of the vote. St. James, 35% of the vote, Troy Carter, Claston Bernard in second. Assumption Parish, 45% of the vote for Troy Carter. And then Ascension Parish, 34% of the vote for Troy Carter. Those are the parishes that are 100% in right now. We're getting close to being 100% in. Actually, 100% in West Baton Rouge Parish as well.
West Baton Rouge,
which is a
confirmed for Karen
24% for, yeah. This is the four-way one. This is the one that went pretty close. All four had a pretty good shot at winning it. East Baton Rouge is trying to see how close it is to being done.
86% reporting. So the question is, can Gary Chambers gain 3 to 4% of the vote and take the lead in the last 14% of votes to come in? And again, we're still waiting to see whether or not Gary Chambers, and I'm going to be honest. So I was thinking that low Peterson performance and high Chambers performance would be more indicative of Bernard being able to make a runoff, but Bernard's not doing well enough. The GOP base isn't unified. But Gary Chambers, I will give him credit, is doing better than I expected. And at this point, Gary Chambers, according to the latest WAPO results with 70% in, is only 4% away from that second place spot. So, well, we do know for sure at this point that Troy Carter is going to take the first slot and it will go to a runoff. We really don't know yet whether Gary Chambers can catch up and take the second place spot. So I guess let's take a look real quick. I'll share my screen and we'll go over this real quick before we get back to the fifth, because we want to make sure that everything is clear. So we'll look at this on the Washington Post. They have a very nicely designed site. So if we look at the second right now, as I said, Troy Carter is pretty much assured for the first place spot, but you've got a pretty close race for second. So Eric was mentioning this earlier, but a lot of the parishes are fully counted. East Baton Rouge, again, not as many voters as, West Baton Rouge, not as many voters as East Baton Rouge. But Peterson narrowly won that. It's looking like right now the only Peterson parish, unless assuming that Gary Chambers somehow manages to win East Baton Rouge, which is his home. But again, if you look real quick at Iberville Parish, Gary Chambers has taken the lead there, and that's close to the Baton Rouge area. Ascension, Assumption, St. James Parish, those are all parishes that have broken for Troy Carter, as we expected. And St. Charles Parish has broken for Claston Bernard, as we expected, though arguably the GOP could have done better here, all told. But if we go over to Jefferson, Karen Carter Peterson, again, not very popular in Jefferson, does not have, any political allies in Jefferson, has burned all the bridges. And that's reflected in the results when we look at them here. Troy Carter is doing extremely well, and the other half of the votes should only solidify that. And same in Orleans Parish. What I estimate we'd see on the precinct level, and once we have those precincts results, I'm going to look at them for my article and compare them against ward results and see if they line up with my expectations. With the more middle income and low income, more traditionally black wards where we've seen the older black electorate come out that prefer a more traditional Democratic candidate like Troy Carter, will we see that dichotomy between the Peterson and the Chambers votes and the Carter votes? Will Peterson and Chambers be battling for those more liberal white precincts in the northern wards that are more partial to the progressive cause? We'll have to see. But one thing that stands out to me is combined, both progressive candidates in this race are doing extremely well. And it makes me think, if the progressive vote somehow unified behind a candidate against Troy Carter, could this runoff be competitive? We'll have to wait and see. But if anything, I think we're going to see a dichotomy where Baton Rouge is voting for one candidate and Orleans is voting for another.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. Within 4% of the vote right now for Karen Carter Peterson and Gary Chambers. Obviously, we want to see more results come in, but not a bad performance for Chambers, all things considered. You obviously want that enough to win.
Sharing screen, but instead I accidentally left the thing. So,
bruh. Yeah, it's a bruh moment right there.
It is. It's like that time I joined one of our elections daily streams and I ended it by accident. I don't remember what that was.
Yeah, that was legendary Weekly. Right there.
Yeah, Elections Weekly, I joined and ended it. But yeah, we're going to be able to, I wouldn't say make a call soon. I still think Karen Carter Peterson can eke this out and get the second place spot. We're going to have to wait and see.
Oh, hey, we got some big news. Claston Bernard is now at 10% of the vote.
Still lower than I expected, to be honest, but
Yeah.
better than what he started off at when he was at about 4%.
I mean, right now it looks like you take Ardoin, you take Lorette, you take Vincent, about 6.9% of the vote going to them, so about 16.9% for those four Republican candidates. It's not great. It's not terrible. Yeah, I know where you're. But I'm serious. It's okay for if that had gone all to Bernard, that's not enough to make the runoff, but it's decent.
Someone says, imagine joining an election stream and ending it. It was a bro moment.
We were not thrilled. Let's just put it that way. We were not thrilled when that happened. We were very confused. Okay, here's another one. I want to mention this because I would be shocked if Joe Biden is able to pry any more Democrats from the House into the administration, because it gets to a point where like the moderates are going to just tell them to stop because every single vote becomes more important for them. They're not having an issue getting through stuff on party line votes, but eventually if they get to the point where there's like 3 people and Jared Golden has to be the deciding vote, it's not a given. He's voting on a lot of idiosyncratic votes on a lot of weird issues. I would think Nancy Pelosi would tell Biden to get his hands off the Democratic caucus in the House, to put it bluntly. I mean, both of those states have Democratic governors, so they could schedule a special election sooner than later. But like, it just seemed like it's begging for trouble, to put it bluntly. Oh wow, oh boy. I wouldn't want to be Wasserman right now. He already called it for KCP, but it's now 23.8% of the vote for Karen Carter Peterson, 21.4% for Gary Chambers.
Yeah, that's definitely a presumptuous call. He has, yeah, that's something that he's probably going to regret. It's definitely too close. I mean, you're only talking about the second place spot being divided by not even 4% now. It looks like 3.5% split between the two of them. With 83% of the vote in. So we're going to try and aim for 10:45, and if we can't make a call at 10:45, then we'll have to go on after that. But you have to remember that all of the mail-in votes, which make up half the total votes, have been counted already. So unlike a normal election, we're essentially waiting on the election day votes. So for once, we will have a decided outcome tonight that will probably yield results that are not all that different from what we eventually get when the results are certified a week from now. And as for the 5th district, we already called it, but the 5th district's at almost 90% reporting. So both of these districts are probably going to be wrapped up in the next 15, 20 minutes. Yes, 10:45 Eastern time. If the election votes keep coming in at that rate, then there's no reason for us to prolong this past them. I mean, we're just waiting to see who gets second place. I don't want to be like, as this person said, silly Dave or something. I respect Dave Wasserman a lot, but I would definitely not want to have made that call this early. But yeah, I swear, this is probably something John Couvillon's going to have a lot of words about tomorrow, because he was basically saying that, and I agreed, that he expected Chambers to get 7 to 10% of the vote, not 22%. So if Chambers somehow gets into the runoff and then wins the runoff, progressives will be very happy, but basically you'll have your own Cori Bush in Louisiana, essentially. Still waiting here, but 84% of the vote in now. And we're still waiting on New Orleans. We're still waiting on Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish, both of which are strongly for Carter, particularly Jefferson Parish. But it appears that Karen Carter Peterson is now going to underperform Chambers and Orleans Parish, which is ironic because I expected Chambers to win East Baton Rouge and get demolished in the eastern half of the district, but now it appears to be going the opposite way.
Mm-hmm. And I just posted on Twitter the current results in case you want to look at those. What's in right now? 84% of the vote in. We're obviously still waiting to see if those results. If you're a big Claston Bernard fan, he's down to 9.4% currently, not so below that 10% mark again. But yeah, we're basically waiting on East Baton Rouge. East Baton Rouge, Jefferson, and Orleans do not have 100% of their votes in, whereas all the other counties do. All the other parishes do.
So if you go on the RRH website, it's very, very cool if you're an election nerd, but there are quite a few precincts now reporting thanks to Cynic's wonderful work. I also recommend following RRH unless you're a Democrat, in which case you probably won't like RRH. But if you have more conservative takes on politics, then RRH is definitely a cool site to follow. And whatever your political opinions are, RRH does really, really, really quality work with election analysis. They cover races down the ballot that people generally ignore, and they rate row offices. Basically, they do what Chaz does, if you know Chaz Nutty-Comey. But
C analysis.
Yeah, C analysis. They do a lot of good work. But
is it CN analysis or C analysis?
I don't know. There are a couple Connerly precincts in Tangipahoa where Connerly is getting 70% of the vote. So
is that where he lives?
I'm not sure, but it looks like the Facebook campaign has worked, everybody. Let's take a look. Oh, wrong one. These are the only Connerly precincts right now, but as you can see, he's pulling 50 in here. He's pulling almost 70 in this precinct in Tangipahoa.
Kind of reminds me of those precincts that voted for the guy running against Lindsey Graham in Greenville County. And not because he's too liberal, but because the guy was just...
I'm going to find out real quick where Chad Connerly lives, because he's winning.
Or maybe he concentrated all his Facebook ads there.
In 3 precincts in Tangipahoa. Makes sense. Maybe those precincts... I mean, how many people live in these precincts again?
Kentwood. So he's from Kentwood, Louisiana.
We're only talking about a couple hundred voters, but those 3 precincts...
Yeah, that would be where Kentwood is. So
basically, he has enlisted the support of his fellow Facebookers in his neighborhood to vote for him for these 3 precincts. Congratulations.
It's also known as the... Yes, he's from Kentwood, which is also, fun fact for those who care, is also known as the hometown of Britney Spears. So...
I stand corrected. Connerly has won a 4th precinct in Tangipahoa. It's right in the middle of a sea of blue precincts, and it has voted for Connerly. Other than that, though, there appear to be no other Connerly precincts, just the Letlow and Christo precincts.
Yeah. Also, for those wondering about how Washita Parish is voting, it's giving Letlow 64% of the vote. There is a very good chance Christophe could end up below 28% of the vote as the only Democrat running in Louisiana's 5th congressional district, which is horrendous. That's really, really bad.
If Julia Letlow wins East Carroll Parish, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, even winning Monroe or Madison or whatever, I always forget the name. What was it again? Can you remind me?
Madison and
winning Madison Parish. Unlikely. Because as I said, if you looked at the combined votes, and I guess I'll just share the screen again, just to show my point here. If you look at the combined votes from last November.
Wait, is she leading? She's leading in East Carroll? Holy crap, she won East Carroll. She won East Carroll.
Okay, well, this is why it's funny, because combined field, this is combined. The only parishes that voted Democratic were Madison and East Carroll, and East Carroll is the most Democratic one. So the fact that she won East Carroll, that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Christophe has completely taken the L.
That is a gigantic L. That is her horrendous L. This is
even worse than Claston Bernard. Because if you look at the raw totals, the combined Republican vote in Louisiana 2 is underperforming the standard by less than the Democrat is in the 5th district. But again, I can show you guys, just for the sake of time, that other Connerly precinct is down here, right here, the other one. Closer, but, you know, not quite the home of the Connerlys over there. I would like to also show you guys LaSalle Parish, which is one of the most Democratic parishes in the country, as you can see right here, where where Christophe is currently getting 0% of the vote in literally all of these precincts, except a few. There is only one Democratic precinct in LaSalle Parish, and it's right in the center, and that's where Christophe is winning. Otherwise, you've got some of the most Republican territory in the district and in the country as well. LaSalle Parish is famous for how Republican it is. But I guess if we look up here at East Carroll, these precinct results might be a bit behind, but it has been confirmed that East Carroll has gone to Letlow, which basically means the only Democratic parish today is East Feliciana, albeit by only 14 votes. So pretty impressive. And let's take a look at the precinct for Louisiana 2, the precinct level, because we're still waiting on a lot of precincts to come back. So, yeah, only 3 candidates have won precincts here. So allow me to go over here to Louisiana 2, which should be more interesting because we've got more precincts in. So let's go out west. And again, Eric, I don't know if you could link this again, but we'd like to 100% shout out the hard work that RRH does. They're a great site. Cynic's great with maps and data analysis. So again, really appreciate what they do for the elections community, because this tool is frankly very interesting. So here is East Baton Rouge over here. This is where Chambers is from. Now, I'm not sure what part of East Baton Rouge he lives in, but I would assume that this is part of the reason why the precincts are breaking the way they are. But you can see, like, let's just check. So on the parish level right now, East Baton Rouge officially was won by Karen Carter Peterson. And you can see it's pretty evenly divided. Yellow precincts here are Chambers precincts, green precincts are Carter Peterson precincts. And you can see as well in West Baton Rouge that Carter Peterson actually managed to win. And a lot of that's simply because of this precinct over here. I think it's West Baton Rouge precinct 1 has the most votes. The rest of these just don't have very many votes altogether. But if we want to go out, Claston Bernard winning a few precincts here. And I bet if you line this up with DRA, these would be the few white precincts that are in the district. But we basically snake our way down. These precincts here are largely the reason why Troy Carter won a lot of these parishes in the middle, like St. James, Ascension, Assumption, so on. And, you know, we get all the way over here. St. Charles, definitely Claston Bernard's strongest region. But it's really interesting when we look at the precincts here. And I would love to look at this with wards as well. I don't know if that's an option here. I don't think so. But basically, you can see that Carter Peterson is not doing very well in New Orleans. So these are the uptown wards. These are the more white wards of New Orleans right here, the more progressive leaning wards. And these are obviously precincts, but if you overlaid the wards over them, you'd see pretty sure something similar with it. So it appears that these voters that, when I talk with John Couvillon, were expected to back Carter Peterson, they're actually voting for Chambers. Carter Peterson is not doing very well. And then the traditionally more black precincts are backing Carter.
Yeah, for perspective here, Gary Chambers had the endorsement of like a handful of Democratic activists, Sean King, who was not necessarily someone you want an endorsement from, St. Guger, Marianne Williamson, Sam Sater. Karen Carter Peterson had Stacey Abrams, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Emily's List, Our Revolution. So progressive vote was kind of split, and then the Democratic establishment, labor unions, newspapers, state federal officials kind of lined up behind Troy Carter.
Here is the Republican vote. So if we want to look at raw performance versus last election, that's not correct. Hold on a second. It was calibrated and then it was off. I think, so this is the Republican v. Democrat by precinct level here in the second. And this is not correct. It's a bit glitchy on this computer, but the Republicans were polling about 13% of the vote, which is slightly less than last November if you combined it. But if you look at Louisiana 5, here we can do the same thing. I don't know why it's acting like that.
Good Lord. Julia Letlow is now over 64% of the vote.
Yeah.
Christophe is now below 28%. That is a horrendous performance. It's hard to understate how bad that is. You're the one Democrat on the ticket. I mean, the combined Republican votes over 73% of the vote right now. 70% of the vote.
Yeah. Again, though, it's really, really, really fascinating to look because, again, like I said, Northern New Orleans, they're not voting for Troy Carter, which is expected, but I think there was just a complete spin around in terms of what people expected. Chambers is the one who's doing well with the progressives here, not Carter Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not.
Carter Peterson's
doing all expected to go to Carter Peterson, but only a handful of precincts in the progressive portions of New Orleans where you've got higher white population are actually voting for Chambers.
The question is how much of the vote is left from those locations, because East Baton Rouge is done right now, right? It's out completely.
Oh right? Yeah, East Baton Rouge is done, and it's kind of interesting because Chambers lost East Baton Rouge. It was his home, so it's interesting to see how well he's doing even after losing his home.
I would not want to be Karen Carter Peterson right now. There's about 20% of the vote or 13% of the vote left, and it's from two counties where Gary Chambers is pulling second.
Yeah. And keep in mind the total deficit right now, Peterson's only leading Chambers by 2.2%. So I'm very glad that we only projected Troy Carter would advance to a runoff. We haven't projected the second place spot yet because Gary Chambers stands at this moment, despite not winning his home parish, to pull an upset.
Yeah, and another thing I want to point out, another thing I want to point out here is that the turnout is very different in these two districts so far. Obviously, we're waiting. There's way more coming in. 96% of the vote in from Louisiana 5 as opposed to 89% from Louisiana 2. But Republicans are over 100,000 vote turnout in Louisiana 5th. It says over 100,000 votes, whereas the second, only about 86,000 right now. Obviously, there's going to be more coming in later, but it's not going to be enough to make up for that difference. So Republicans turned out in a higher number, in the 5th than the second's competitive race was.
A cool tool real quick that I'll share also from the RRH website, just real quick.
And here's another fact from Politico's Ali Mutnick.
Sorry, go ahead.
Is that in 2018, after the 2018 election, Republicans had 13 women in Congress. They now have 31. That's a lot.
Yeah, the 2020 freshman class had a ton of women, and not just white women, but Hispanic women as well.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me reload the website. I think it's being a bit glitchy. But again, I'd like to thank our dedicated viewer base. We've had a lot of viewers on here tonight, and it's wonderful to have a nice debut stream back like this with a lot of people watching.
Yeah, for two non-competitive special elections in Louisiana. That's pretty impressive, you guys.
Although I will say I think we do make this stuff more interesting than it seems, but
yeah. I think it's possible Letlow gets over 65% of the vote. She's at 64.5% right now, and there's another 4% of the vote left, and they're all from white Republican counties or parishes.
I give up at this point, Eric. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
I mean, Christophe only has one county, East Feliciana.
The parish, the winning parishes by party. So it's matching up with the 2020 race. Overall, it is matching up. So the Republicans are winning. This about lines up with the last election. They're underperforming a bit at St. James and Assumption, but this pretty much lines up with the 2020 race with Richmond.
Also, one thing I want to mention, since there are you guys here and you are here right now, since some of you seem to like our content, I would want to plug one thing, which is new we launched. We're obviously going to get off here in around 15 minutes or so. We did launch a Patreon last week. I'll go ahead and post the link. We have some small tiers right now. We're introducing some rewards. We're going to try and start the Discord server over the weekend. If you like what we do, we can go ahead and subscribe. We have a small, if you don't want any benefits, we got a $2 tier. We've got other tiers. We're introducing some new tools. We're hoping to launch a new tool, which is really awesome, Monday, which you guys will love. We got other things we want to do, and it's easier when we have resources to do so. We had raised $1,600 in 7 days for our redistricting project tool. So you guys are awesome. If you like what we're doing, so, you can help us out there or not. Either one of them. We like having you here regardless. So that's just the quick shameless plug. But really, thank you guys for being here. And again, right now, Chambers is only about 2,000 votes off from Karen Carter Peterson. 89% of precincts in. Jefferson Parish, Chambers has dropped to 4th place, but in Orleans, he is ahead. He is ahead in Orleans. So I think Peterson probably has it, but it's really not what you wanted. I mean, I would not be that comfortable with it being this close if I were her. Because she was supposed to be the anti-establishment conservative candidate. Yeah, I will mention if you're interested in HR1, we should have an article coming out this week about HR1 from one of our contributors. I'm not going to mention who because their work in this is their own work and they work at their own pace. But we should have an overview of that coming out. We don't speak about our political personal opinions on here. We try not to. We try to make this fairly objective. But there's resources out there about those two things that you can read, and we will be posting some stuff about them as well on Elections Daily. So,
but yeah, it appears we're going to be wrapping up here. But someone like Dave Wasserman, again, I greatly respect Dave Wasserman, a very highly respected analyst, intern for the same guy that I did over the summer when he was my age. But still, he might end up being right. We're going to have to see. But it was definitely a little bit of a call that was made too early if you look at Peterson versus Chambers, because Peterson's now only leading by about 2.1% in terms of locking up that second place spot against Gary Chambers. So we're going to have to be watching this pretty closely in terms of where the remaining votes are coming from. So we've only got Orleans and Jefferson Parish left. And Jefferson Parish, again, heavily for Carter, even more heavily than Orleans Parish. So we're looking at Orleans Parish. Orleans Parish is going to make or break Chambers and Peterson, depending on which person advances to the runoff. We're going to have to wait and see. But again, Orleans Parish, that's going to make it or break it. And we have about 19% of the vote left. We're going to be covering for 10 more minutes, but we're going to log off at 11. Hopefully by then, since the votes have been pouring in pretty fast, we'll have a better idea of the outcome. But again, thank you all to our viewers. Check out our Patreon. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, YouTube. So subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Twitter. You can find all of those links on our website. Also, we have a lot of new projects that you're going to be looking forward to that are arguably just as cool, if not cooler, than sorry, I lost my train of thought. I got a text. But cooler than the redistricting project that we already released. So thank you. Also, I have to put out a compliment to Vermin Shrek in the YouTube comments, who combines the best of both worlds, both Vermin Supreme and Shrek. So thank you for making our night with an interesting YouTube name and your compliment.
He really is an all-star.
Yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, I think we should take a look at Chad Connerly's website just to, spend some time or waste some of the time. But Chad Connerly for Congress, leadership you can trust. It was enough to win 3 precincts in his hometown. So do you have anything interesting we can add in the last 10 minutes? Because I don't want the awkward silence to make everybody go into boredom for too long. I mean, we have managed to – I find that we make all these elections pretty interesting, even though they're generally not as interesting. But somehow we've made a stream about Louisiana just as fun as, our past primary streams from last year or our Georgia coverage stream. Can't wait for the New Jersey stream. But yeah.
Yeah, Harrison is the New Jersey expert here.
Yeah, I'm excited for New Jersey. The New Jersey primary is in June, so it's actually coming up pretty fast. So hopefully we'll be able to take a look at that.
Mm-hmm.
And polls close here at 8, so that's a good time in the evening.
Yeah, I don't think Chambers is going to have enough support to catch up to Karen Carter Peterson, but he's going to get a lot closer than people thought he could.
Yeah, I just want to add this as well to answer Paul's question. We do talk about political opinions in DMs and on Twitter. So we just try to keep actual full-on political opinions away from the stream because we tried to be nonpartisan on this site, but we're certainly open to talking about political issues with you guys, 100%.
Yeah, just reach out on Twitter or whatever. We're just not on here. We're covering more objective. Yeah. Someone asked a good question, which is which representatives will be double bunked in our 4-2 map of Louisiana? That is interesting, and I'm going to look at that. I don't think. I would think if you look at it, the fourth that we had. I'm going to actually look at this real quick because
I have it pulled up already.
That map will not happen. Democrats are really overestimating the chances they get a second seat in Louisiana. It's really marginal they get it to begin with. Like John Bel Edwards could ask for it, but I don't think people would even be that willing to do it. Some of the Democrats who are in red seats would be really want to ask for that.
I'm going to plug our redistricting project again here, but this is a hypothetical so-called fair map where you get a second Democratic seat. Now, in this map, the second district is still likely going to elect a black Democrat, even though it's plurality white. Again, it's an opportunity seat, and it's one that's still favorable to the black electorate there. But this allows the 6th district to also take in more minority votes so it can become more Democratic.
And it is majority black if you look at the CVAP numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So none of these seats is heavily black, obviously, when we look at this.
Yeah.
But
our map would actually kind of wreck incumbents because Scalise would be in a blue seat. Higgins would be in a blue seat. Garrett Graves would be in a blue seat. So there'd be a lot of people moving around.
The GOP could nominate Chad Connerly for this seat.
But no, I want to answer the question here, which is that right now, in our map, Garrett Graves would not be safe, I don't think. He lives in Baton Rouge, although he may live in the St. George's portion. Mike Johnson lives in Benton. He would be safe. Clay Higgins lives in Lafayette, although I don't know if he lives in the blue or whether or not he lives in the blue part or not. He would probably be moved into the first.
Yeah.
And then Scalise would probably run for Scalise would run for the 5th, which would leave the 3rd between.
And I just want to note that our fair map cleans up that awkward Pontchartrain bridge connection, and it is the longest bridge in the world. Someone did comment that earlier. I've driven across it, or I haven't. When I was little, we drove across it, and that was fun. It was very long.
Yeah.
I did actually see a coffin floating in the lake. That's not a lie.
So Scalise would probably run in either 1 or 5. Higgins would probably run in 1. Benton would be fine. I think Letlow would honestly be fine in any version of a black VRA seat that's drawn. It would probably be the people around Baton Rouge and New Orleans that would be in trouble.
And
she would probably be fine.
Show you our redistricting project because we have about 5-7 minutes or so left. A lot of you guys know about double bunking and gerrymandering. For anyone on here who's not necessarily an election nerd, as we say, double bunking is where 2 incumbents are drawn into the same seat, hence double bunking in redistricting. And you guys all know gerrymandering. So this is the Republican gerrymander we have on our map for Louisiana. And this project on our website, it shows fair maps and gerrymanders for both parties, as well as compact maps for every state. So this is the Louisiana Republican gerrymander. So obviously this would work very well for the continuing, survival of the incumbents as they currently have their seats. This second right here, it's very, very much like the current one. Ugly, but incorporates New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And for the Democratic gerrymander, this was actually made using a computer algorithm by Adam Trencher, who is a math genius and one of our lovely contributors. Very much appreciate all his work he does. But he's an expert at making these Democratic gerrymanders with computer algorithms. So what you end up getting here is a 4-2 Democratic House map in a state that votes for Republicans statewide by double digits. So this is just a wonderful example of how gerrymandering and changing the way in which you draw the electorate into districts can take a solidly Republican state, but give it a Democratic majority House delegation. And some of these districts are crazy. They're all plurality white, but they generally are all a little under D+10, definitely over D+5, and therefore unlikely to go to a Republican. And why do I say that? Because in some other states, a district that's anywhere from D+5 to D+10 can theoretically go to a Republican in a red wave. But in a state like Louisiana, it's very much like South Carolina in that it's racially polarized. And that causes it to be very inelastic by political terms, which basically means in simple English, plain English, that it's unlikely you'll see major electoral swings between wave years in a polarized matchup. And most of these southern states are racially polarized and therefore inelastic.
Yeah. I do want to answer a very good question from Vermin Shrek, which is, do you think they'd adopt a fair map? I don't think our fair map is actually that likely because it would be a second black seat. I think actually, honestly, whoever that New Orleans Democrat is would want a more African-American seat. I think they could draw a second competitive one around Baton Rouge. But honestly, I don't think Louisiana gets a second Democratic seat because people aren't going to make a risk here. Someone's asking for a formal projection. I don't think we need to formally project that it's going to be Carter and Carter Peterson. We already mentioned that possibility earlier. We project as a runoff. We project it's going to be a runoff between those two people.
Now, I would be confident. We'll make a projection on Twitter later tonight because we're going to be wrapping up here shortly. But given the fact that every parish is in and there are only 4% of the votes left in Orleans, I think that Peterson has enough of a 2% win, 2% lead to make it to that second place spot. Overall, though, to conclude, what we've seen tonight, the elections have stuck to form. We expected Letlow to win without a runoff, and that has happened, though Letlow has done better than expected. And we expected Carter and Karen Carter Peterson to get to a runoff, and they both have. But Gary Chambers has done better than expected. Now, I don't expect the last 4% of votes in Orleans Parish are going to be enough to – I don't expect that will be enough to, bump Chambers over Karen Carter Peterson. But anything can happen. I just don't think there are enough votes left.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess to conclude, somebody did ask, we have 3 minutes left, but someone asked for the California Dem gerrymander. So I guess I'll show another great example of gerrymandering from the project we made on our website.
I drew this. I drew this one.
Eric did draw this. And yes, he did. So this is fair. Just so you can see, it looks pretty nice. Overall, pretty fair. California is a Democratic state, so there are only so many Republican districts you can get. The Republican gerrymander, you can do a little bit better. Mostly not necessarily getting more districts, but just shoring up districts to ensure they don't flip. And then the Democratic gerrymander is just this, which is chaos. And basically you ensure that Democrats have a lock on every single seat. So Eric did draw that. It is impressive. I'll show some of the other maps. We also have a nationwide form where you can view the nationwide maps. Let me just quickly do that. So here you go. This is fair nationwide. You can see it's pretty evenly balanced in terms of toss-ups. The purple seats are the toss-up seats that are close in elections, and those are the seats that would essentially swing the balance of Congress. So again, fair doing its job, pretty evenly balanced. I also drew this map of New Jersey here, which I'm proud of. It's pretty fair. And if we go over to our Republican gerrymander, again, you can see it does its job as you would expect. It puts Republicans pretty much in the advantage in Congress. The Democratic one does the opposite, as you would expect again. Some of these can look a bit wacky because they're gerrymanders. And I will say the Democratic one is slightly more successful at securing a larger Democratic majority than the Republican one. That's pretty much because of California, though. And last but not least, we have compact by shape. Again, very much competitive. If anything, even more competitive, slightly more fair technically than the fair section. A ton of toss-up seats here. But again, if you're really in favor of not letting partisanship and incumbency come into play when you look at how districts are drawn, then compact makes sense because these are nice shapes. They're pleasant to look at, and that's kind of the point. And generally, they yield a competitive Congress as well. So it depends on how you feel. If you want fair maps or if you want the compact by shape, or maybe you want gerrymanders. It just depends. But it just shows our project. We put a lot of work into it. And if you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to check it out as redistricting rolls around because it really shows you just how changing the way boundaries are drawn can take the same block of voters and get completely different outcomes. And that's one of the most interesting parts of politics. But yeah, and Eric, any last updates before we wrap up for tonight?
No, other than I believe it was John Couvillon posted on Twitter that the total combined vote for the seat was 65 to 34 Actually, let me pull up the numbers here. 64 to 34 Trump seat in November. Right now, it's a let low 65 to 27 seat, with other Republicans getting 6% of the vote. So it went from Trump plus 30 to Republican plus. Sorry, let me do the math here. From Trump plus 30 to Republican plus 44. So not a great night for Democrats in this district.
No, but also an underperformance, just to be fair to the other side, for Republicans in the second district as well. Overall, to conclude, if you were in the minority party in one of these districts, you weren't really enthused to come out and vote tonight. But yeah, so we really, just to wrap up, we appreciate you guys watching. We had almost 50 viewers at our peak. Wonderful. And we're going to be having elections more frequently, both primary coverage for New Jersey and some for Virginia, except the Republican governor's nominations done by convention. And also other special elections, and ultimately our November coverage. So it's an off year, not as much as you would get in a presidential year or a midterm year, but there are always going to be elections. And we really appreciate you guys watching. You are all great, and we appreciate all our viewers. And I would like to conclude by officially saying that Elections Daily endorses statehood for Shrek's Swamp. So there you go. Thank you, everybody. Eric, any final things?
Nope. Just thank you guys for coming on. We really appreciate it. And just follow our Twitter account. If you really like what we do, support the Patreon, and look out for that new project we're going to be putting out this week, either Monday or Tuesday.
It's pretty amazing. If you like election results, you're going to be in heaven. You'll be addicted.
Seriously, it will blow your mind. It is literally the coolest thing ever. I'm not making this up. It is incredible.
Yeah, we're on our path to officially, keep growing, and it's working.
Rivaling 538.
Yeah, but if you just want, we're already past them. But if you want predictions, if you want projections for the race, we will be making an official projection here on our Twitter. So stay tuned there. Thank you guys. Have a good night.